the illusion of merry England. There exists in the popular imagination a vision of Tudor England that glitters with romance. Henry VIII in his jewelled doublet, Elizabeth in her ruff and pearls, Shakespeare penning sonnets, courtiers dancing pavanes in candlelit halls. It is an England of pageantry and possibility, of New World exploration and religious reformation, of art and architecture that still captivates us 5 centuries later. This vision is not false, but it is profoundly incomplete. It is the England of perhaps a few thousand people, the monarch, the aristocracy, the wealthy merchants, the successful artists. For the other 4.5 million inhabitants of Tudor England, life was something else entirely, brutal, precarious, painful, and almost certainly short. Tonight, we embark upon a journey not to the glittering court, but to the streets, fields, and hovels where the vast majority of Tudor subjects lived and died. We shall walk through a world that would kill most modern people within weeks, that would seem alien and terrifying to anyone accustomed to 21st century comforts, that operated according to rules and assumptions fundamentally different from our own. This is not an exercise in superiority, in congratulating ourselves for living in a more enlightened age. The Tudors were not stupid or primitive. They were humans like us, working with the knowledge and resources available to them, surviving as best they could in circumstances far harsher than most of us can imagine. They built, loved, laughed, and created beauty amid conditions that would break us. Their resilience commands respect even as we acknowledge their world would likely kill us. Why wouldn't you survive in Tudor England? The reasons are manifold and interlocking, creating a web of dangers from which escape was nearly impossible. Disease, of course. The period was a golden age for pathogens, a nightmare for human immune systems. Violence, both official and unofficial, claimed lives with disturbing frequency. Hunger stalked even in good years and became mass starvation in bad ones. Accidents that would be minor inconveniences today were death sentences then. Childbirth killed mothers routinely. Childhood itself was perilous enough that parents dared not grow too attached to infants who might not survive their first year. But survival in Tudor England was not merely a matter of avoiding death, though that was challenging enough. It was about navigating a social order that was rigid, hierarchical, and unforgiving of transgression. It was about accepting your place in the great chain of being and never aspiring above it. It was about conforming to religious orthodoxy that changed with each monarch, where backing the wrong theology could cost you your life. It was about knowing when to speak and when silence was survival. Tudor England was a surveillance state where neighbours reported neighbours, where servants betrayed masters, where the wrong word overheard in an alehouse could lead to arrest, torture, and execution. It was a society obsessed with order, with everyone in their proper place, with maintaining boundaries between ranks that modern people find incomprehensible. To survive was not just to stay alive, but to stay invisible, to avoid the attention of authorities, to never distinguish yourself in ways that invited scrutiny. The century that began with Henry VII's consolidation of power after the Wars of the Roses and ended with Elizabeth I's death would see England transformed, from Catholic to Protestant again, from medieval kingdom to emerging nation-state, from isolated island to global power. These transformations were achieved through violence, through persecution, through the suffering of millions who wanted only to live quietly and were swept up in forces beyond their control. We who live in an age of antibiotics, of abundant food, of central heating and clean water, of hospitals and anesthesia, of human rights and religious tolerance, we would be utterly unprepared for Tudor England. Our bodies would lack immunity to diseases that Tudor children survived or died from. Our minds would struggle to accept the omnipresence of death, the casual brutality, the rigid hierarchy, the absence of privacy, the powerlessness of ordinary people before authority. Consider the simple matter of temperature. You're cold in winter? Tudor houses, even wealthy ones, were freezing. Fireplaces provided localized heat while drawing cold drafts through the house. Glass windows, if they existed, were small and poorly sealed. Most people huddled near fires, wore all their clothes at once, and simply endured months of bitter cold. You've never been truly cold, not bone-deep, inescapable, relentless cold that penetrates no matter what you do. Tudor winters would teach you. You are hungry? Tudor food, when available, bore little resemblance to modern cuisine. Bread was coarse, often adulterated with cheaper grains or worse. Meat was heavily salted or spoiled. Vegetables were limited and seasonal. The diet was monotonous, nutritionally inadequate, and frequently contaminated. Yet people grateful to have even this fare, knowing hunger was always one bad harvest away. You're sick. Tudor medicine was a mixture of folk remedies, superstition, humoral theory, and prayer. Physicians were rare and expensive. Diagnosis was guesswork. Treatment was as likely to kill as cure. Most illnesses were simply endured until you recovered or died. The concept of effective medical intervention barely existed. You value your freedom? Tudor England had no concept of individual liberty as we understand it. You belonged to your social rank, your parish, your master, if you were a servant or apprentice, your husband if you were a woman. You went where you were told, did what you were ordered, believed what you were commanded to believe. Nonconformity invited punishment ranging from public humiliation to execution. As we journey through this chronicle, we shall explore the many ways Tudor England would defeat, demoralise, and likely kill you. We shall examine disease and death, food and famine, work and exploitation, law and disorder, faith and persecution, gender and power. We shall venture into cottages and castles, fields and forests, streets and prisons, examining the lived reality behind the romantic myth. The Tudor Age was England's Renaissance, its Reformation, its emergence onto the world stage. It produced Shakespeare and Marlowe, Tallis and Byrd, explorers who circumnavigated the globe, merchants who built trading empires. It was an age of extraordinary accomplishment by a tiny elite. It was also an age of extraordinary suffering by the vast majority. Both truths can coexist. History is not simple. The same age that produced Hamlet also produced the burning of heretics. The same society that created architectural marvels left most of its people in hovels. The same century that saw England rise to prominence saw most of its inhabitants live and die, in circumstances we would consider intolerable. Prepare yourself, then, for a journey into a past that is both familiar and alien, that shaped the world we inhabit yet operated by rules we no longer accept. Prepare to understand why, despite the romance of the Tudor Age, despite the fascination with its monarchs and the beauty of its artefacts, you almost certainly would not survive there, not because you lack courage or intelligence, but because survival in Tudor England required adaptations you do not possess, knowledge you have never needed, and acceptance of conditions you would find unbearable. The chronicles begin in the most ordinary of places, a village in the English countryside, where the vast majority of Tudor subjects lived out their brief lives. Let us see what awaited them, and what would await you. The Village and the Land, 1485 to 1510. The morning mist rises from the fields surrounding a small village somewhere in the English Midlands. The year is 1490, 5 years into Henry VII's reign, and England is slowly recovering from decades of civil war. The village is unremarkable. Perhaps 50 families, maybe 200 souls, clustered around a stone church, a manor house, and a scattering of timber-framed cottages. This is where you would almost certainly live if you were transported to Tudor England. Not in London, not in a merchant's townhouse, certainly not in a palace. But in a village like this, or one of thousands like it scattered across the kingdom. 90% of England's population lives in rural areas, working the land, bound to it by ties of obligation and necessity that moderns find difficult to comprehend. Your dwelling would likely be a 2-room cottage, 1 room for living, eating and working, 1 for sleeping, shared by the entire family and possibly by livestock in winter. The walls are wattle and daub, woven sticks covered with a mixture of mud, clay, and animal dung that hardens into walls that keep out most of the rain and some of the wind. The roof is thatched with straw or reeds, harbouring mice, birds and insects in quantities that would horrify you. There is no glass in the windows. Glass is far too expensive for common folk. Just wooden shutters that you close against weather, closing out light as well. The floor is packed earth, covered with rushes that are changed irregularly, beneath which accumulate food scraps, spilled liquids and worse. The smell is what you'd notice first. Smoke from the fire pit, unwashed bodies, cooking food, animal waste, rotting organic matter beneath the rushes. You'd never escape it. It would permeate your clothes, your hair, your very skin. The fire burns in the centre of the main room, venting through a hole in the roof if you're lucky, filling the house with smoke if you're not. This fire is the centre of life. It provides heat, light, and means of cooking. It must be tended constantly. Let it go out and you must beg coals from a neighbour, or strike sparks with flint and steel, a frustrating process. You would quickly learn to never let the fire die. Your possessions would fit in a single chest. A few changes of clothes, if you're prosperous, some tools, perhaps a cooking pot, wooden bowls and spoons, a blanket or two. That's it. No books, you can't read anyway. No decorations, you can't afford them. No privacy. The concept barely exists. Your entire life, all your possessions, your family, your work, all contained in these 2 rooms that would seem impossibly cramped and primitive to you. But the cottage is merely shelter. Your life is in the fields. The village sits amid open fields divided into strips, the famous medieval strip system that is only beginning to break down in the early Tudor period. You hold strips in different fields, some near the village, some distant, scattered about so that everyone shares good and poor land. You don't own this land. You hold it by copyhold tenure from the manor lord, obligated to pay rent and provide labour in exchange. The labour is brutal and unending. Agriculture in 1490 is entirely manual. The plough is pulled by oxen, which you might share with neighbours if you cannot afford your own team. The soil is heavy clay in most of England, backbreaking to work. You broadcast seed by hand, walking the furrows, scattering grain, hoping enough takes root. You weed fields by hand, on your knees, for hours that stretch into days. You harvest with a sickle, cutting grain by hand, binding sheaves, gathering them into stooks to dry. If you're male and of peasant stock, this is your life from age 7 or 8 until death. Children work as soon as they're able, watching animals, gathering firewood, weeding fields. Women work equally hard, tending gardens, preserving food, spinning wool, brewing ale, managing the household. The romanticised past where women stayed home and men worked is fiction. Everyone worked. Everyone had to. Survival demanded it. The work schedule follows the seasons with inexorable regularity. Spring ploughing and planting leaves you exhausted before summer's weeding and haymaking begin. Autumn harvest is frantic. All grain must be gathered before weather destroys it, followed by threshing through the winter. In the cold months, you maintain tools, repair buildings, process wool, and pray the stored grain lasts until the next harvest. But you don't work only your own land. As a copyholder, you owe labour to the manor lord. Several days per week, the exact number depends on your tenure, you must work the lord's demesne land, ploughing his fields, harvesting his grain, maintaining his property. This manorial labour comes first, even when your own crops need attention. You have no choice. It is the price of holding land, enforced by custom, law, and the knowledge that defiance means eviction and starvation. The village operates communally in ways that constrain individual choice. You cannot plant what you wish. The village decides collectively what each field will grow in the 3-field rotation system. You cannot fence your strips. The fields are open, and after harvest, everyone's animals graze the stubble. You cannot work Sundays or holy days. The church and custom forbid it. You cannot leave the village without the Lord's permission. You are bound to the land, and attempting to flee is illegal. The isolation would suffocate you. Most villagers never travel more than 10 miles from their birthplace in their entire lives. The nearest market town is perhaps a day's walk. London might as well be the moon. You know nothing of the wider world except what travellers or priests tell you. Your horizons are limited to the village boundaries. Your ambitions constrained to survival and perhaps modest prosperity by village standards. Yet the village provides security of a sort. Everyone knows everyone. Reputation matters enormously. The village has mechanisms for dispute resolution, for mutual aid, for enforcing norms. The church provides ritual structure to life. Feast days break the monotony. Marriages, baptisms, and funerals are communal events. There is poverty, but there is also solidarity, a sense that everyone is in the struggle together. Still, this security comes with suffocating conformity. Nonconformity is punished. Gossip is currency and weapon. Your neighbours watch you constantly, ready to report misbehaviour to the manor court or church court. Privacy is impossible. Secrets are rare. Everyone knows everyone's business, their scandals, their failures, their transgressions. The manor lord looms over everything, even if he rarely visits. He is the source of authority, the owner of the land, the holder of justice. His steward manages the estate, collects rents, organises labour, enforces regulations. His court handles disputes between villagers, punishes offences, imposes fines. You cannot escape his influence. Even if you never see him, his power shapes every aspect of your existence. The church is the other centre of power. The parish priest is one of the few educated men you'll encounter. He conducts services in Latin you don't understand, hears confessions, administers sacraments, records births, marriages, and deaths. He also reports to the bishop, watches for heresy, enforces moral standards. The church is not a place of gentle spirituality, but an institution of control, a mechanism for enforcing orthodoxy. This is your world if you live in a Tudor village around 1490, narrow, constrained, communal, and hard. The land sustains you but demands constant labour. The community supports you but constrains your freedom. The hierarchy positions you firmly at the bottom, but provides structure and order. It is a life that modern people would find intolerable within days, yet millions lived it for generations, finding meaning and moments of joy amid the hardship. And we have not yet discussed the greatest threats: disease, hunger, violence, injustice. Those await in the chapters ahead. For now, understand that the simple challenge of daily life in a Tudor village, the physical labour, the lack of privacy, the absence of comfort, the total dependence on others, would defeat most moderns before any dramatic dangers materialised. The sun sets on the village, and families gather around their fires, eating their meagre suppers, exhausted from labour, facing another day exactly like this one tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, until death provides the only escape from the eternal cycle of agricultural toil. This is the foundation of Tudor England, the reality underlying all the splendour, the millions of anonymous lives that supported the famous few, disease and death in every season. The year is 1517, and in a village not unlike the one we just visited, a child wakes with a fever. Her mother feels the heat radiating from small body and knows, with the grim certainty born of experience, that this may be the beginning of the end. She has already buried 3 children. This daughter, her 4th child, might be the 5th grave in the churchyard. Disease was the great leveller in Tudor England, striking rich and poor alike, though the poor died in greater numbers, and the rich had slightly better odds of survival. In 1517, as Henry VIII enjoys the vigour of his youth, and England prospers under relatively stable rule, death stalks every household, every street, every village with a persistence that modern people cannot fathom. The child with fever might have any of dozens of diseases, measles perhaps, which kills a significant percentage of infected children, smallpox, which leaves survivors scarred and sometimes blind, scarlet fever, which turns skin red and hot before sometimes killing its victims, diphtheria, which slowly strangles children as their throats swell closed, whooping cough, which causes such violent coughing that children break ribs or suffer brain damage from lack of oxygen. Or it might be something simpler, an infected wound, a bout of diarrhea that leads to fatal dehydration, a respiratory infection that progresses to pneumonia. Things that antibiotics would cure in days prove fatal in an age without effective medicine. The child's mother can only watch, pray, and prepare herself for another loss. Tudor medicine is a mixture of ancient Greek humoral theory, folk remedies, astrological consultation, and desperate hope. Physicians trained at university in the works of Galen and Hippocrates are rare and expensive. They diagnose by examining urine, checking pulses, and consulting astrological charts to determine when the planets favour treatment. Their remedies often involve bloodletting, purging, or inducing vomiting, treatments based on balancing the 4 humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, that govern health according to ancient theory. These treatments are useless at best and harmful at worst. Bloodletting weakens patients who need strength to fight infection. Purging dehydrates those already suffering from diarrheal diseases. The medications prescribed, strange mixtures of herbs, minerals, and sometimes toxic substances like mercury or arsenic, rarely help and often harm. A wealthy person who can afford a physician's care may actually fare worse than a poor person who cannot. simply being left alone to either recover or die. Most people rely on folk healers, on wise women who know herbs and traditional remedies. Some of these remedies have genuine medicinal properties. Willow bark for pain. It contains salicylic acid, related to aspirin. Chamomile for digestive upset. Honey for wounds. It has antibacterial properties. Others are pure superstition, wearing amulets, reciting charms, touching saints' relics. When people recover, the remedy gets credit. When they die, it's God's will. There is no systematic way to determine what works and what doesn't. You would be horrified by surgical practices. Surgery is performed by barber surgeons, craftsmen, not university-educated physicians, who also cut hair and pull teeth. Surgical instruments are rarely cleaned. The connection between cleanliness and infection is not understood. Surgeons operate in street clothes stiff with the blood and pus of previous patients. Anesthesia doesn't exist beyond alcohol and opium, which provide limited relief. Patients are held down by strong assistants, while surgeons work as quickly as possible amid screaming and struggling. Most surgical patients die, either from blood loss during the operation, from shock and pain, or from infections afterward. Wounds suppurate. Producing pus is considered a good sign, part of healing, not recognised as infection. Gangrene sets in, fevers develop. Most people die within days or weeks of surgery. Only the most desperate or the most foolish seek surgical treatment except for obvious necessities, like amputations of hopelessly damaged limbs. Epidemic diseases sweep through England with terrifying regularity. The sweating sickness, a mysterious disease unique to Tudor England, arrives in 1485 and returns in waves throughout Henry VIII's reign. It strikes suddenly, victims feel fine at breakfast, develop fever and sweats by midday, and are dead by evening. It particularly affects the wealthy and healthy, the opposite of most diseases, for reasons never understood. The disease disappears in the 1550s as mysteriously as it arrived, its cause never identified even by modern science. Plague, the Black Death that devastated medieval England, returns periodically. Not with the apocalyptic mortality of 1348 to 49, but in outbreaks that kill thousands at a time, primarily in cities. People know plague spreads somehow from person to person, leading to crude quarantine measures. Infected houses are sealed with inhabitants inside, marked with red crosses. Watchers are posted to ensure no one escapes, condemning entire families to death. The lucky die of plague. The unlucky starve to death trapped in sealed houses. Typhus, spread by lice, is called jail fever, because it flourishes in crowded prisons and ships. Typhoid, spread by contaminated water, kills steadily if unspectacularly. Dysentery, bloody diarrhea from bacterial infection, dehydrates and kills, especially in summer. Tuberculosis, consumption, slowly destroys lungs over months or years, causing victims to waste away while coughing blood. There is no cure, no effective treatment, only the grim certainty of death. Infant mortality is staggering. Between 1/4 and 1/3 of children die before their first birthday. Another quarter die before age 10. If you survive childhood, you have reasonable odds of reaching 40 or 50. But childhood itself is a gauntlet of diseases, accidents, and malnutrition that most modern children would not survive. Parents cannot afford to become too attached to infants. Loving a baby who might die within weeks invites heartbreak. Some parents delay naming children until they seem likely to survive. Many treat infant death with stoicism born of necessity. Grief, yes, but also acceptance that this is simply how life is. The graveyard beside every church is filled with small graves, testament to the countless children who never reached adulthood. Childbirth itself is exceptionally dangerous. Between 1% and 2% of women die in childbirth or from complications within weeks afterward. This sounds small until you realise women typically bear 5 to 8 children. Over a reproductive lifetime, the cumulative risk of dying in childbirth approaches 10%. Maternal mortality is a major cause of death for women of childbearing age. The dangers are manifold. Prolonged labour that exhausts the mother or baby, breech presentation or other abnormal positions, hemorrhage that cannot be stopped, retained placenta that causes infection, puerperal fever, an infection of the uterus, strikes in the days after birth, causing fever, pain, and death within days. There is no treatment. Women who develop puerperal fever almost always die. Midwives attend births, but their knowledge is empirical, passed down through apprenticeship, without understanding of anatomy or infection. They cannot perform caesarean sections to save babies in difficult births. The mother would certainly die from such surgery. If a baby cannot be delivered normally, both mother and child usually die. Sometimes midwives perform craniotomy, crushing the baby's skull to remove it in pieces to save the mother's life, a horrific procedure that haunts everyone involved. Mental illness is poorly understood and brutally treated. Those who act bizarrely are considered possessed by demons or punished by God. Treatment might involve prayer, exorcism, beating to drive out devils, or confinement. The violently insane are chained or caged. Institutions like Bethlehem Hospital, Bedlam, house the mentally ill in conditions of appalling neglect. Visitors pay to watch the inmates as entertainment. The concept of mental illness as disease, treatable with compassion and medicine, doesn't exist. Your own immune system would betray you in Tudor England. Modern people, vaccinated against many diseases and rarely exposed to the infectious disease burden of the past, have immune systems unprepared for the Tudor microbial environment. You'd lack immunity to diseases Tudor children survived. Measles, which you might have been vaccinated against or never encountered, would strike you as an adult when it's more dangerous. Parasitic worms, ubiquitous in Tudor England, would colonise your intestines, causing chronic illness. Dental problems are universal and untreatable. There is no fluoride in water, no toothpaste, and no floss. People clean teeth by chewing twigs or rubbing with cloth, if they clean them at all. Sugar is still rare and expensive in early Tudor England, so tooth decay is less common than it will become. But abrasion from gritty bread wears down teeth. Periodontal disease causes teeth to loosen and fall out. Abscessed teeth cause excruciating pain with no relief, except extraction, without anaesthesia, by a barber surgeon using pliers. The pain of toothache drives some to suicide. Others simply endure it until the abscess either heals or kills them. Infection can spread to the brain or bloodstream. Many adults lose most of their teeth by middle age, subsisting on soft foods, their faces collapsed from missing teeth, their health compromised by inability to chew properly. Chronic pain is a constant companion for many. Arthritis from years of hard labour cripples joints. Old injuries healed poorly cause permanent pain. Back problems from heavy lifting, from sleeping on hard surfaces, from constant bending in field work, plague the middle-aged. There is little relief. Alcohol and opium, if you can afford it, dull pain temporarily. Mostly, you endure. Complaint is pointless. Everyone hurts. Life is pain. You accept it or go mad. The omnipresence of death shapes Tudor mentality. People are religious partly from genuine faith, but partly from terror. Heaven and hell are real, immediate, vivid realities. Death might come tonight, and your eternal fate depends on dying in God's grace. The Church's power rests partly on controlling access to salvation through sacraments. To die unshriven, without final confession and communion, risks hell. This fear keeps people obedient to religious authority. Wills are written early and updated frequently. Everyone knows death comes without warning. The sudden deaths from sweating sickness, from accidents, from violence, reinforce this. You might be healthy at breakfast and dead by supper. Better to have your affairs in order, your soul prepared, your bequests specified. The modern assumption that you'll have warning before death, time to prepare and say goodbye, doesn't exist. Public executions and the display of corpses make death visible in ways modern people find disturbing. Bodies hang in gibbets along roads as warnings. Heads of executed traitors decorate London Bridge. The corpses of criminals dangle from gallows until they rot away. Death is not hidden or sanitized, but omnipresent, a constant reminder of mortality and the power of authority. If you were transported to Tudor England, disease would likely kill you within the first year. Your immune system, unprepared for the microbial environment, would fail. Without antibiotics, without vaccines, without effective medicine, you would be helpless before infections that modern medicine cures easily. A cut that becomes infected, a bout of diarrhea that becomes dehydration, a respiratory infection that becomes pneumonia, any of these could kill you within days. Even if you survived the disease environment, even if you somehow adapted, you would live knowing that death might come at any moment, that illness might strike without warning, that medical help would be useless. The psychological burden of this uncertainty, this helplessness, this constant proximity to death would weigh on you constantly. The Tudor acceptance of death as God's will, as part of natural order, would be hard to achieve for someone raised in an age where death before 70 seems premature and preventable. The village mother sits beside her fevered daughter through the night, praying, wiping her forehead, giving her sips of water. By morning the fever breaks. The child will survive this time. The mother offers thanks to God and the saints, knowing that reprieve is temporary, that death will come for this daughter as it came for her siblings, if not now, then someday, perhaps soon. She cannot protect her. No one can. Disease does not discriminate. Prayer does not always save, and medicine cannot cure. Life in Tudor England means living with death as your constant companion, never knowing when it will claim you or those you love. Hunger and the treacherous harvest. The summer of 1527 brings disaster to England. Heavy rains fall throughout the growing season, turning fields to mud, rotting grain in the ground, preventing ripening of what little survives. By autumn, the harvest is catastrophic, perhaps half the normal yield. The stored grain from the previous year is depleted. Another poor harvest the following year compounds the crisis. Famine grips England, and thousands will die before the crisis passes. You would not understand hunger as Tudor people knew it. Modern famines exist tragically, but in developed nations, true starvation is rare. Food insecurity, yes. Hunger, certainly. But the grinding, desperate, consuming hunger that comes from months of inadequate food, that weakens your body, clouds your mind, makes you obsessed with food to the exclusion of all else, this you have likely never experienced. The Tudor diet in good years is monotonous and barely adequate. For common people, bread or porridge made from grain provides perhaps 70% of calories. The grain is whatever grows locally, wheat in good areas, barley or rye in poorer ones, oats in the worst. The bread is coarse, dark, and often adulterated. Millers mix cheaper grains with wheat, add peas or beans to stretch flour, sometimes include sawdust or chalk. You eat this bread day after day, meal after meal, year after year. Pottage, a thick soup or thin stew, supplements bread. It's made from whatever is available: dried peas or beans, onions, leeks, cabbage, herbs, occasionally a bit of meat or fat. It simmers in a pot hanging over the fire, with new ingredients added daily, the pot rarely emptied completely. The taste is bland and the texture gritty, but it provides sustenance and warmth. Meat is a luxury for most people. Peasants might keep chickens for eggs. A pig they fatten through, some at a slaughter in autumn, perhaps some geese or ducks. But most livestock belongs to the lord or to wealthier villagers. Common folk eat meat primarily at feasts after animal slaughter. The meat that won't preserve is shared or sold cheap. Otherwise, meat appears in the diet irregularly, a treat rather than a staple. Fish provides protein, particularly for the many fast days when meat is forbidden. The church designates Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays as fast days, plus all of Lent and various holy days, nearly half the year. On these days, eating meat is a sin. Fish is allowed, so rivers and coasts are fished intensively, and preserved fish, salted cod, pickled herring, is sold inland. The fish is often rancid or overly salted, but it's protein, and that matters. Dairy products, cheese, butter, milk, supplement the diet when available. Cows, sheep and goats provide milk that's consumed fresh, or made into cheese that can be stored. Butter, salted heavily to preserve it, seasons poor food or is spread on bread. But these products are seasonal, animals' milk production declines in winter, and vulnerable to spoilage. Milk sours quickly, cheese moulds, butter goes rancid. Nothing is reliably fresh or safe. Vegetables are limited and seasonal. Root vegetables like turnips, parsnips and carrots can be stored through winter in root cellars. Onions and leeks keep reasonably well. Cabbage can be preserved by salting, but fresh vegetables are available only during growing season, and the variety is limited compared to modern times. Many vegetables we consider common, potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, corn, haven't been introduced from the Americas yet. Fruit is a rare treat. Apples and pears grow in England. But most of the harvest is made into cider or perry, pear cider, preserving the calories as alcohol. Berries can be gathered wild in summer, enjoyed briefly fresh, then forgotten until next year. Preserved fruit is a luxury. Making jam or preserves requires expensive sugar. Most people see fresh fruit only a few weeks per year. The wealthy eat vastly better than commons. Their tables feature meat at every meal, fine wheat bread, imported wines, spices from the Orient, preserved fruits, and elaborate dishes. The contrast between the lord's table and the peasant's board is stark and intentional. Food marks status as clearly as clothing or housing. The rich consume thousands of calories daily while the poor subsist on minimal rations. But even the wealthy fear famine years. When harvest fails, everyone suffers, though the poor suffer first and most. The grain reserves deplete. Bread prices rise. The poor, who spend most of their income on food, even in good years, cannot afford rising prices. They eat less. They switch to cheaper grains. They sell possessions to buy food. Eventually, they have nothing left to sell and no money to buy. Then, they starve. The famine of 1527-28 follows this pattern. Initially, prices rise, but food is available. The poor tighten their belts, eat less, worry but cope. As months pass and the next harvest also fails, desperation sets in. Families eat seed grain they should save for planting, dooming future harvests. They eat animals they should preserve for breeding. They strip bark from trees, dig up roots, eat anything remotely edible. Malnutrition progresses through recognizable stages. First, the body depletes its fat reserves. People become thin, their faces gaunt, their clothes hanging loose. Then muscle breaks down as the body cannibalizes itself for protein. Physical work becomes difficult, then impossible. Children stop growing, women stop menstruating. The immune system weakens, making people vulnerable to disease. Starvation's final stages are horrific. The belly swells with edema, fluid accumulation from low protein, creating the paradoxical appearance of a full stomach on an emaciated body. The mind deteriorates, concentration becomes impossible, personality changes. Some become apathetic, lying down to die. Others become irrationally aggressive or develop obsessive fixations. Eventually, major organs fail. Death comes as a relief. The very young and very old die first during famines. Infants whose mothers cannot produce milk starve quickly. Toddlers, with high caloric needs for their size, waste away. The elderly, already weakened, lack reserves to survive deprivation. Adults in their prime have the best chance of survival, but emerge from famine weakened, with health damage that persists for years. Disease follows famine inevitably. Malnutrition compromises immune function. People become vulnerable to infections they might otherwise resist. Typhus, tuberculosis, dysentery, all flourish in malnourished populations. More people die from disease during and after famines than from starvation itself. The famine of 1527-28 likely kills through disease many whom hunger merely weakened. Crime increases during famines. Desperate people steal food, despite harsh penalties. Bread left cooling on windowsills disappears. Fields are gleaned completely, with people taking what they're not entitled to. Livestock are stolen and butchered. The authorities respond with increased vigilance and harsher punishments, but hunger drives people to risk execution rather than starve slowly. Vagrancy becomes widespread. Those who have lost everything abandon their villages seeking food elsewhere. They beg along roads, huddle at church doors, hope for charity that rarely comes. Authorities view them as threats, potential criminals and rebels who disrupt public order. Laws punish vagrancy harshly, but still they roam, having no other choice. The government's response to famine is limited. There is no national relief system, no food stockpiles, no disaster response. The church provides some charity, but its resources are inadequate. Wealthy individuals might distribute food to the local poor, but this is voluntary and inconsistent. Mostly people are left to survive as best they can. Market controls are attempted. Authorities try to prevent hoarding, fix maximum prices for bread, ensure grain is sold locally rather than exported. These measures have limited effect. Merchants evade controls. Prices rise regardless. Grain goes to whoever can pay most, not to those who need it most. Some villages fare better than others. Those with far-sighted lords who maintained larger grain reserves, those in areas less affected by bad weather, Those with access to alternative foods like fish or wild game, these suffer less. But geography is fate. If you happen to live where the harvest failed completely, no amount of planning or virtue will save you. The psychological trauma of famine persists after food returns. Those who survived hunger never forget it. They hoard food compulsively. They struggle to share even when plenty returns. The fear of hunger haunts them. Children who endured famine carry the physical and psychological scars into adulthood. You, transported to Tudor England during a famine year, would struggle immensely. Your body, accustomed to regular, adequate meals, would rebel against deprivation. The psychological challenge of genuine hunger, not missing a meal but going days with minimal food, would test you severely. The modern assumption that food is always available, that someone will provide if you lack means, would be violently disproven. Even in good years, the Tudor diet would seem inadequate and unpalatable to you. The coarse bread, the monotonous pottage, the rancid preserved foods, the near total absence of fresh vegetables for much of the year. This would feel like starvation even when it's normal. Your body needs variety, freshness, adequate nutrition. Tudor food provides subsistence, not abundance. The famine ends eventually, as famines do. The harvest of 1529 is better. Prices stabilise. Life returns to normal, though thousands have died, and thousands more are permanently weakened. The survivors plant their fields, rebuild their reserves, try to forget the horror of hunger. But they know it could happen again. Indeed, it will happen again. Famine is not an aberration in Tudor England, but a recurring threat. Another way the precariousness of life manifests. As the village recovers, as people eat adequate bread again, as children begin to regain weight, the memory of famine remains fresh. Parents look at their surviving children with renewed gratitude and persistent fear. The next poor harvest might come next year or in 10 years, but it will come, and when it does, hunger will return, and some who survived this time will not survive the next. This is life in Tudor England, survival between disasters, gratitude for adequate food, terror of the next failure of harvest that could mean slow death by starvation, the rhythm of work, and the theft of time. Dawn arrives earlier in summer than you're accustomed to. No daylight saving time, no artificial lighting to extend useful hours. The sun rises, and with it, you rise, because candles are expensive and firelight is inadequate for most work. You work during daylight and rest when darkness falls. Your schedule is dictated by the sun, not by choice or convenience. If you're a farmer, and statistics say you almost certainly are, your day begins before sunrise in busy seasons. You must be in the fields when light permits work. There are no weekends as you understand them, no 40-hour work weeks, no paid holidays. You work when work must be done, which is nearly always. Ploughing demands you walk behind oxen for hours, guiding the plough through heavy clay soil, maintaining straight furrows despite aching legs and back. The plough turns soil and you walk, turn soil and walk, until the field is complete or darkness stops you. If you're ploughing the Lord's demesne as part of your labour obligation, you cannot quit when tired. You work the required days regardless of weather, regardless of your own needs. Sowing is back-breaking repetition. You fill a bag with seed, walk the furrows, broadcast grain with practiced hand motions, walk back, refill, repeat, hour after hour, until the seed is gone or the field is planted. Your back aches from the bag's weight, your arm from the throwing motion, your legs from the walking. But you cannot stop. The planting season is brief. Miss it and the year's harvest is lost. Weeding means kneeling or stooping in fields, pulling weeds by hand, for hours that stretch into days. The sun beats down. Your back screams protest. Your hands bleed from pulling at stubborn plants. But weeds compete with crops for water and nutrients. Leave them and the harvest suffers, so you weed, field after field, until the job is done. Haymaking is frantic. Hay must be cut, dried and gathered quickly before rain ruins it. You scythe grass in long sweeps, your arms burning from the repetitive motion. You turn the cut hay to dry it. You gather it into haycocks. You load it onto carts. You work until exhaustion, stop to eat and sleep briefly, then continue. The weather determines the schedule, not your preferences. Rain threatens, and everyone works into darkness by dim moonlight, trying to save the hay. Harvest is the most intense labour of the year. All grain must be cut and gathered within a few weeks. Miss the narrow window and crops rot in fields or are destroyed by weather. Everyone works harvest. Men, women, children, even the elderly contribute what they can. You cut grain with a sickle, bent over, grasping stalks with one hand and cutting with the other, binding sheaves, stacking them to dry. The work is endless and desperate. Cut, bind, stack, cut, bind, stack. Your hands blister then bleed. Your back spasms. Your legs tremble from fatigue. But you cannot stop. The harvest must be gathered. Some years, villages hire temporary workers or arrange reciprocal help from neighbouring communities. Everyone understands. Harvest determines whether you eat next year. After harvest comes threshing, separating grain from stalks by beating sheaves with flails or trampling them with animals. The work continues through autumn and winter. Grain must be threshed, winnowed to remove chaff, bagged and stored. The dust fills your lungs. The repetitive motion of flailing causes arm and shoulder injuries, but it must be done day after day until all the harvest is processed. Between major seasonal work, there are endless daily and weekly tasks. Animals require tending every single day, feeding, watering, milking, moving to fresh pasture. No day off for livestock care. Gardens need weeding, watering, harvesting. Tools require maintenance and repair. Buildings need fixing. Wood must be cut and gathered for cooking and heating. The list of necessary tasks never ends. Women's work is equally unending. In addition to helping with field work during busy seasons, women manage households. They spin wool into thread, then weave thread into cloth. Hours of labour for simple fabric. They sew and mend all the family's clothes by hand, by firelight, straining their eyes over tiny stitches. They cook every meal from raw ingredients, which means tending fires, hauling water, grinding grain, preserving food for winter. Brewing ale is women's work and it's nearly constant. Water is often unsafe to drink. Weak ale is the standard beverage for adults and children alike. Brewing requires obtaining grain, malting it, boiling it with herbs, fermenting it, and bottling or casketing it. Each batch lasts only days before spoiling, so women brew constantly, producing fresh ale to keep families supplied. Laundry is occasional but brutal. Heating large quantities of water, hauling it to tubs, scrubbing clothes with harsh soap, rinsing, wringing, drying. All this takes an entire day or more. Laundry is done infrequently because it's so labour-intensive. People wear clothes until they're filthy, then wash everything at once, perhaps monthly if they're prosperous enough to have multiple garments. Children work as soon as they're capable. A 5-year-old can watch geese, gather eggs, fetch water, help in gardens. By 7 or 8, children do significant work, watching younger siblings, weeding fields, helping with harvest, learning crafts. Childhood as a protected time of play and learning doesn't exist for common people. Children are economic assets, additional labour the family desperately needs. The concept of retirement doesn't exist. You work until physically unable, then depend on family or charity. The elderly who can no longer perform hard labour do lighter tasks, watching children, simple crafts, tending gardens. But those without family to support them face grim prospects. Some parishes provide minimal charity. Others leave the elderly to beg or starve. Disabilities end working lives prematurely. An injured back, arthritic hands, failing eyesight, any of these can make someone unable to work and therefore unable to earn. There is no disability insurance, no safety net. Disabled workers become beggars or depend on family charity if they're lucky. Accidents are common and often permanently debilitating. Farming is dangerous. Oxen kick or gore handlers. Scythes slip and cut through tendons or arteries. Heavy loads crush feet or cause hernias. Falls from ladders or haystacks break bones that heal poorly or not at all. Each accident might end someone's working life, plunging them and their family into poverty. The pace of work varies seasonally, but never truly stops. Even in winter, when fieldwork diminishes, there's indoor work, threshing, tool repair, craft production, spinning and weaving. The idea of leisure time, of vacation, of working only 40 hours per week, these don't exist. Life is work, briefly interrupted by sleep and meals, until death provides the final rest. You would find the physical demands crushing. Modern people, even those who exercise regularly, are not conditioned for the sustained manual labour Tudor life requires. Hours of walking behind a plough, Days of swinging a scythe, weeks of stooping to weed, your body would break down. Muscles you didn't know existed would scream. Joints would swell. Your hands would develop calluses and scars. The mental toll would be equally challenging. Modern work, however demanding, typically involves variety, mental stimulation, clear stopping points. Tudor agricultural labour is repetitive, monotonous, apparently endless. The same motions repeated thousands of times. The same tasks recurring in predictable cycles. No end in sight except incapacity or death. Moreover, you work primarily for others' benefit. The crops you plant on the Lord's domain don't feed your family. The labour you owe takes you away from your own land and your own needs. You are, in many ways, still a serf, even if that term is falling out of use. Your labour is not entirely your own. Your time is claimed by obligations you cannot refuse. The Church claims time as well. Sundays and holy days, perhaps 90 days per year, are days of rest, mandated by religious law. You cannot work your fields, cannot do most productive labour. Initially this seems generous, but these rest days come whether convenient or not. If harvest threatens and Sunday arrives, you stop working. If planting is urgent and a holy day intrudes, you observe it. The Church's control over time limits your ability to respond to agricultural necessity. And these rest days are not leisure as you understand it. Church attendance is mandatory, often consuming several hours. The day is for worship, not recreation. Working on Sunday or holy days is sinful and potentially criminal. Neighbours report violators. The church courts punish them. Your time is not your own to use as you wish, but is controlled by authorities enforcing religious observance. The concept of personal time, hours you control completely, to spend however you wish, barely exists. What little time remains after work and sleep is governed by social and religious obligation. Community festivals, church services, family duties, these fill your hours. Privacy is rare. Solitude is suspicious. A person who withdraws from community life invites gossip and scrutiny. You would rebel against this theft of your time, this reduction of your life to endless labour for others' benefit, punctuated by mandatory religious observance. The modern assumption that your time is yours, that 40 or 50 hours of work per week is sufficient, that you're entitled to leisure and privacy, none of this exists in Tudor England. Your time, your labour, your very life are claimed by others, your lord, your church, your community. What remains is barely enough for survival, never enough for self-determination or personal fulfilment. As the sun sets after another day of endless labour, as you collapse beside the fire too exhausted to do more than eat and sleep, you face the knowledge that tomorrow will be identical, and the day after, and every day until you die or become too broken to work. This is life in Tudor England for the vast majority. Unending work, time stolen by obligations, exhaustion as the permanent state, with no escape except death. The rhythm of work is the rhythm of life, and both are relentless. Justice, law, and the spectacle of punishment. The market square in a small town fills with spectators on a clear morning in 1547. A wooden platform has been erected overnight. The crowd murmurs with anticipation and something darker, a hunger for the spectacle about to unfold. Today a man will be hanged for theft, a woman will stand in the pillory for scolding, and a youth will be whipped for vagrancy. Justice in Tudor England is public, brutal, and designed to terrify as much as to punish. The legal system you'd encounter in Tudor England would seem alien and terrifying. There is no presumption of innocence. Accusation alone creates suspicion. There are no public defenders, no right to legal representation for the poor. Trials are swift, often lasting less than an hour. Juries exist but are easily influenced by authorities. Justice is arbitrary, biased toward the powerful, and frequently corrupt. The courts themselves are multiple and overlapping, creating a confusing jurisdictional maze. Manor courts handle minor disputes between villages and enforce the lord's rights. Church courts govern moral offences, marriage disputes, and heresy. County courts managed by justices of the peace handle most criminal matters. Royal courts in Westminster deal with serious crimes and matters touching the king's interests. Borough courts govern towns. Which court has jurisdiction can be unclear, and the powerful manipulate this confusion to their advantage. Justices of the peace are local gentlemen appointed by the Crown to maintain order and administer justice. They are unpaid, view the position as a mark of status, and bring their class prejudices to their work. A gentleman accused of a crime faces far more lenient treatment than a commoner. JPs protect their own class while viewing common folk with suspicion and contempt. Justice is not blind. It sees class perfectly clearly and judges accordingly. The accused has few rights. You cannot refuse to testify against yourself. In fact, silence can be taken as evidence of guilt. You can be tortured, though this is technically restricted to cases of treason. In practice, authorities use various forms of coercion to extract confessions. The rack stretches limbs until joints dislocate. The scavenger's daughter compresses the body until ribs crack. Other tortures are employed with creativity limited only by sadism. Evidence standards are loose. Hearsay is admitted. Reputation matters enormously. If you're known as troublesome, you're more likely to be convicted. Witnesses can be pressured or bribed. Confessions obtained under torture are accepted as valid. The accused cannot cross-examine witnesses or present defensive evidence effectively. The proceeding is more inquisition than trial as moderns understand it. For petty crimes, punishment is public humiliation. The pillory holds you immobile while passers-by throw rotten vegetables, excrement and stones. Standing there for hours, defenceless against assault, covered in filth, is designed to shame you before your community. The cucking stool, used primarily for women accused of being scolds or disturbing the peace, dunks you repeatedly in the river or pond while crowds mock and jeer. Branding marks criminals permanently. Thieves are branded with a T on the thumb or cheek. Vagabonds receive a V branded into their flesh. The hot iron sears through skin, leaving a scar that advertises your crime forever. You cannot hide your criminal past. Employment becomes nearly impossible. You're marked as untrustworthy, excluded from normal society, pushed toward further crime by the very punishment meant to reform you. Whipping is common for lesser offences. You're stripped to the waist and tied to a post or cart. A strong man flogs you with a leather whip or bundle of birch rods. The number of strokes depends on the offence. 10, 20, 40 lashes. Your back is flayed open, blood running down your sides. The pain is excruciating. Infection often follows. Some die from infected wounds days or weeks after punishment. For more serious crimes, mutilation serves as punishment. Thieves might lose a hand, removing their ability to steal again while marking them permanently. Those who speak sedition might lose ears or have their tongues bored through with hot irons. Counterfeiters lose the hand that forged coins. The punishment fits the crime in brutal symmetry, destroying the body part that committed the offence. Death sentences are common and carried out publicly. Hanging is the standard execution method for common criminals. The condemned stands on a cart with a noose around their neck. The cart is driven away, leaving them to strangle slowly, legs kicking, taking several minutes to die. There is no drop to break the neck. That's a later innovation. Death by strangulation is slow and agonizing. The crowd watches executions as entertainment. Vendors sell food and drink. Pickpockets work the dense crowds. Children watch, learning what happens to those who break laws. The condemned might give a final speech, often a prepared statement warning others not to follow their path. Then the cart moves, the rope tightens, and another life ends as public spectacle. Treason receives special treatment. Traitors are hanged, drawn, and quartered. The most horrific execution English law prescribes. The condemned is hanged until nearly dead, cut down while still alive, castrated, disemboweled while conscious, then beheaded and quartered. The body parts are displayed publicly as warnings. This torture execution is designed to maximize suffering while demonstrating state power. Women convicted of treason or murdering their husbands are burned at the stake. The condemned is tied to a post surrounded by bundles of wood. The fire is lit. If the executioner is merciful, he strangles her with a cord before flames reach her. If not, she burns alive, screaming until smoke suffocates her, or flames consume her. The execution can take 30 minutes of conscious agony. Heresy, wrong religious belief, is punished by burning. During Mary Owen's reign in the 1550s, nearly 300 Protestants are burned alive for refusing to recant their faith. They die slowly, praying and singing hymns while flames consume them. The burnings are public. designed to terrify others into conformity. Instead, they create martyrs whose courage inspires continued resistance. Prison is not typically punishment, but rather detention pending trial or execution. Prisons are horrific places. Newgate and other London prisons pack inmates into underground cells without sanitation, light or adequate food. Jailers are unpaid. They charge prisoners for everything: better cells, food, blankets, even removal of leg irons. Those without money suffer abominably. Disease spreads rapidly. Many die awaiting trial. Debtors face imprisonment until debts are paid, or creditors release them. But imprisoned debtors cannot work to earn money to pay debts, creating a trap. Some languish in prison for years. Family members must bring food or debtors starve. The system is cruel and irrational, imprisoning people for being unable to pay while ensuring they can never earn money to pay. For those who can afford it, sanctuary provides temporary escape from justice. Churches offer sanctuary, ancient right that protects fugitives from an immediate arrest. The fugitive can remain in church for 40 days, during which time they might negotiate with authorities or plan to flee the realm. After 40 days, they must surrender or leave England forever. Sanctuary is honoured, though authorities often post guards to arrest fugitives who venture outside sacred grounds. Benefit of clergy offers another escape, but only for the educated. Anyone who can read Latin, traditionally only clergy, can claim benefit of clergy for a first offence, transferring their case to more lenient church courts. To prove literacy, the accused reads a passage from Psalms, always Psalm 51:1, called the neck verse, because reading it saved necks from hanging. Those who can read escape hanging, the illiterate hang. This creates perverse incentives. Literate criminals can commit one serious crime with relative impunity. Some memorise the neck verse despite not actually being literate. The system favours the educated over the poor illiterate masses, reinforcing class privilege within the justice system. Women face additional legal disabilities. Married women have no legal identity separate from their husbands. Coverture makes husband and wife one person in law, and that person is the husband. Wives cannot own property, sign contracts, or sue in their own names. A husband can legally beat his wife as long as the stick is no thicker than his thumb. Wives who kill husbands commit petty treason and burn. Husbands who kill wives face mere murder charges. Rape prosecutions are rare and conviction rarer still. The woman's reputation is scrutinised more than the accused's actions. If she's not a virgin, if she has any sexual history, if she delayed reporting, if she cannot prove she fought back violently enough, any of these can prevent conviction. Rape is seen as primarily an offence against the woman's father or husband, damaging their property, her chastity, reputation, not primarily a crime against the woman herself. The poor face systematic discrimination within the justice system. Unable to afford lawyers, unable to bribe officials, unable to call character witnesses of good standing, they're convicted at far higher rates than the wealthy. A gentleman accused of theft might be released on his own recognizance. A poor man is imprisoned. A noble convicted of a crime might face fines. A commoner faces corporal punishment or death. Corruption pervades the system. Officials accept bribes. Juries are intimidated or bribed. Witnesses perjure themselves for money. Justice is for sale to those who can afford it. The poor receive neither justice nor mercy. Only the full weight of law designed to keep them in their place. You, with modern assumptions about justice, would be appalled and endangered. Your expectation of due process, of rights, of fair treatment, of proportional punishment, none exist. Speaking out against injustice might earn you charges of sedition. Defending yourself too vigorously might be taken as contempt. Knowledge of your rights would be useless because you have almost none. Your modern body would not endure Tudor punishments. A day in the pillory would leave you injured from thrown stones and objects. A whipping would flay your back open. Risking infection, you'd have no antibiotics to treat. The psychological trauma of public humiliation, of watching brutal executions, of living under threat of arbitrary punishment, this would mark you permanently. The crowd begins to disperse as the hanged man's body stops twitching and is cut down. The woman is released from the pillory, covered in filth, sobbing with humiliation. The youth who was whipped is untied, his back a mass of bloody stripes, and sent on his way to either die of infection or heal with permanent scars. justice has been served, order has been maintained, and terror has been instilled in all who watched. This is how Tudor England maintains control. Through fear, through brutality, through public demonstrations of power that leave no one in doubt about what happens to those who transgress. The precarious state of housing and home. Imagine waking each morning in a space roughly 12 feet by 12 feet, smaller than most modern bedrooms, that serves as bedroom, living room, kitchen, and sometimes stable for the entire family. The walls are thin timber frames filled with wattle and daub, woven branches plastered with mud, clay and dung that let in cold draughts and sometimes actual rodents that burrow through the soft material. This is home for the majority of Tudor English people, a cottage that would be condemned as uninhabitable by any modern housing authority, lacking everything we consider basic necessities. There is no running water. You fetch it from a well or stream, possibly hundreds of yards away. There is no sewage system. You relieve yourself in a bucket that must be emptied into a pit in the yard. There is no heating except the open fire that smokes the house and risks burning it down. The floor beneath your feet is packed earth, perhaps covered with rushes, long grass-like plants that are changed irregularly, under which accumulate food scraps, spilled liquids, animal droppings, and worse. Walking barefoot on this floor means stepping on things you'd rather not consider. The smell is inescapable, a mixture of smoke, unwashed bodies, decaying organic matter, and the waste pit in the yard. The roof above is thatched, bundles of straw or reeds laid in overlapping layers to shed rain. When well maintained, thatch is reasonably weatherproof. When neglected, which is common among the poor, it leaks during rain, creating puddles inside the house and encouraging rot. The thatch harbours mice, rats, birds, and countless insects that periodically fall into the living space below. In winter, snow sometimes blows through gaps in the thatch. Light comes from the fire, from candles you likely cannot afford, or from small windows. Openings in walls covered with oiled cloth or thin animal membranes that admit dim light while keeping out some weather. Glass windows are luxury items for the wealthy. Most people live in perpetual dimness, working by feel as much as sight, going to bed when darkness makes work impossible. The fire pit dominates the main room, a shallow depression in the centre of the floor where wood burns constantly, its smoke rising to the ceiling and eventually finding its way out through the thatch. The smoke is thick, acrid, irritating to eyes and lungs. Everything in the house is covered with a film of soot. Your skin is grey with it. Your clothes reek of smoke. You never escape it. Respiratory problems are universal. The constant smoke inhalation damages lungs over years. Cooking happens at this fire. A pot hangs from a chain, simmering pottage or boiling water. Bread might be baked in a communal oven if the village has one, or more likely in the coals of your fire. The constant fire means constant risk. Cottages burn regularly, sometimes taking entire families with them. Sleeping near a fire pit means risk of rolling into it. Children are sometimes burned fatally. But you cannot eliminate the fire because you'd freeze and starve without it. The sleeping area, if you're prosperous enough to have a separate room, is barely better. The bed, if you have one, is a simple wooden frame with ropes strung across it, supporting a mattress stuffed with straw. This straw harbours bedbugs, fleas and lice in prodigious numbers. You're bitten constantly during sleep. Scratching becomes automatic, unconscious. The bedbugs leave tracks of welts across your body. You never sleep without being bitten. Many people don't have beds at all. They sleep on the floor on piles of straw, covered with whatever blankets they own. In winter, the entire family huddles together for warmth, along with any animals brought inside to prevent them from freezing. The body heat of multiple people and animals raises the temperature slightly, but you're still cold, deeply and persistently cold for months. Privacy is non-existent. The cottage has 2 rooms at most, often only one. Every bodily function, every intimate moment, happens within sight and hearing of the entire family. Modesty is a luxury no one can afford. You become inured to the complete lack of privacy, to the constant presence of others, to the impossibility of solitude. Furniture is minimal. Perhaps a table, a few stools, a chest for storing possessions. That's it. No chairs. Those are for wealthy people. No cabinets, no closets, no decorative items. The cottage is purely functional, containing only what's absolutely necessary for survival. Your modern expectation of a living room, a dining area, a kitchen with appliances, bedrooms for each family member, none of this exists. Structural problems are common and difficult to fix. The wattle and daub walls develop cracks and holes. Repairs require gathering materials, mixing mud and dung, patching the walls, labour you can ill afford when there's always fieldwork demanding attention. The roof needs periodic rethatching, a major expense of time and materials. Many cottages gradually deteriorate, becoming increasingly drafty and leaky, but families continue living in them because they have no alternative. The yard around the cottage is small and crowded. There might be a small garden where you grow vegetables, onions, cabbage, beans, herbs. There's certainly a midden heap where you throw household waste and empty the chamber pot. Chickens scratch around the yard, providing occasional eggs. A pig might be fattening in a small pen, eating scraps and waste. The outhouse, if you have one rather than just a pit, is a simple structure that barely provides shelter while you relieve yourself. Water management is a constant challenge. When it rains, water runs off the roof onto the ground around the cottage, turning the yard to mud. In dry periods, you must haul water from the village well, making multiple trips daily. Water is heavy. A bucket weighs 8 pounds. Carrying water for cooking, drinking, and minimal washing requires significant effort. As a result, water is used sparingly. Washing is infrequent. Laundry happens rarely. Vermin are unavoidable. Rats nest in the thatch, emerging at night to hunt for food scraps. Mice scurry along walls and across sleeping bodies. Flies swarm in summer, attracted by the midden heap and food waste. Fleas jump from person to person, spreading disease along with itching. Lice live in hair and clothing, impossible to fully eradicate. You share your home with hundreds or thousands of unwanted residents, and there's nothing you can do about it. The cottage offers little protection from the weather. In summer it's hot and stuffy, the low ceiling trapping heat from the fire and the sun. In winter it's bitterly cold despite the fire, with drafts penetrating through every crack and gap. Wind whistles through the poorly sealed walls, rain sometimes leaks through the roof. You're only marginally more comfortable inside than outside, yet you have nowhere else to go. Wealthy people live vastly better, but even aristocratic houses would seem primitive to moderns. They have glass windows, multiple rooms, fireplaces with chimneys, a recent innovation, furniture, decorations. But they still lack running water, sewage systems, effective heating for large spaces. Even in the finest houses, you'd be cold in winter, limited by candlelight at night, unable to bathe easily. The great houses of the nobility feature elaborate architecture, expensive furnishings, tapestries and artwork, but they're drafty, difficult to heat, full of servants who lack privacy, and still fundamentally pre-modern. The difference between a cottage and a palace is enormous by Tudor standards, but would seem minor compared to the gulf between either and modern housing. You, accustomed to climate control, to hot and cold running water, to privacy, to light at the flip of a switch, to comfortable furniture, to appliances that do much of household labour, you would find Tudor housing almost unbearable. The first week might seem an adventure, roughing it like camping, but after a month of cold, smoke, vermin, lack of privacy, and primitive conditions, after your skin is chronically dirty, your clothes smoke-saturated, your body covered with insect bites, your lungs irritated from constant smoke inhalation, you'd be desperate for relief that doesn't exist. The cottage is not temporary hardship to be endured before returning to comfort. This is life, permanent and inescapable. This is where you'll spend most of your non-working hours for your entire life, where you'll raise children, nurse sick family members, age, and eventually die. The cottage that would seem like condemned housing, uninhabitable, unsafe, unsanitary, this is home. And you'd have to accept it as such or go mad from the contrast between what you know is possible and what reality provides. As night falls and darkness forces you inside for lack of light to work by, as you huddle near the fire trying to stay warm while smoke fills your lungs and your eyes water, as you scratch at flea bites and try to ignore the rats rustling in the thatch above, you'd finally understand that survival in Tudor England isn't about dramatic dangers, but about enduring daily conditions that grind you down, that never improve, that exhaust you not with spectacular challenges, but with relentless discomfort that never, ever ends. The perils of childhood and the lottery of survival. A mother holds her newborn son for the first time, feeling the familiar mixture of love and dread. This is her 6th pregnancy. Her first child died at age 2 from fever. Her second made it to age 5 before dysentery killed him. Her third survived to adulthood, a rare success. Her 4th was stillborn. Her 5th died within days of birth. Now this 6th child has arrived, apparently healthy, and she wonders how long he'll live. These are not the thoughts of a cold or unloving mother, but of a woman who has learned through bitter experience not to attach too deeply to infants who might not survive. The emotional arithmetic of Tudor parenting is brutal. Assume loss, guard your heart, celebrate each month survived as a minor victory against overwhelming odds. The dangers begin before birth. Pregnancy receives no medical care. There are no prenatal visits, no ultrasounds, no monitoring. Women simply carry their babies and hope for the best. Poor nutrition increases risk of complications. Hard physical labour throughout pregnancy. Women work in fields until labour begins. Creates additional dangers. Many pregnancies end in miscarriage or stillbirth. Labour happens at home, attended by a midwife and female relatives. The father and other men are excluded. This is women's business. The birthing chamber is kept warm and dark, windows shut despite stale air. The labouring woman might sit in a birthing chair or squat, attended by women who offer encouragement, prayers, and what limited practical assistance they can. The midwife's knowledge is empirical, passed through generations of observation. She knows techniques to turn breech babies, to manage bleeding, to help with prolonged labour. But her understanding is limited by the absence of anatomical knowledge, by the lack of any concept of infection, by the impossibility of surgical intervention. When labour goes badly wrong, all she can do is pray and try to minimise suffering. Many women die in childbirth, hemorrhage that cannot be stopped, obstructed labour when the baby cannot pass through the birth canal. Puerperal fever, infection of the uterus that strikes days after delivery and kills within a week. Eclampsia that causes seizures. Complications that modern medicine resolves easily prove fatal in Tudor England. Every pregnancy is a gamble with death. The newborn faces immediate dangers. If the baby doesn't breathe, the midwife tries various techniques. Rubbing, blowing in the mouth, holding by the feet. But without understanding respiratory physiology, success is mostly luck. Premature babies, too small and weak to survive without modern neonatal care, simply die. Babies with birth defects incompatible with life die within hours or days. Even healthy newborns face risks. The practice of swaddling, wrapping infants tightly in cloth strips, immobilizes them, supposedly to help limbs grow straight. But tight swaddling restricts breathing and movement. Some infants suffocate. The practice of placing babies in cradles near fires for warmth sometimes results in burns or smoke inhalation deaths. Wet nursing is common among wealthy families who can afford it. The mother, often exhausted from childbirth and needing to resume social obligations, sends her infant to a wet nurse in the countryside. The wet nurse, typically a poor woman with her own baby, breastfeeds both infants. This practice exposes the wealthy infant to whatever diseases the wet nurse and her family carry. Many wealthy children die in the care of wet nurses. For poor families, the mother nurses her own child while continuing to work. She carries the infant with her to the fields, stopping periodically to nurse. The baby is often left in the care of slightly older siblings, children watching children, while the mother works. Accidents are common. Babies fall into fires, are dropped, are accidentally smothered by exhausted older children who fall asleep on them. Nutrition is inadequate from the start. Wealthy women often have difficulty nursing after months of tight corsets that compress and deform breasts. Poor women, malnourished themselves, may not produce enough milk. There are no formula alternatives. Animal milk is tried but often causes diarrhea and death. Cow's milk isn't digestible for human infants. Babies who cannot get sufficient breast milk often simply starve slowly. Weaning begins around age 2 and introduces new dangers. Solid foods are difficult for small children to digest. Contaminated food causes diarrheal diseases. The transition from breast milk's protection to unprotected exposure to foodborne pathogens kills many toddlers. The weaning diarrhea that strikes newly weaned children is often fatal. Infectious diseases ravage young children. Measles, which we now vaccinate against, kills between 10 and 30% of infected children in Tudor times. Smallpox leaves survivors scarred and sometimes blind. Diphtheria slowly strangles as the throat swells closed. Whooping cough causes such violent coughing that children break ribs or suffer brain damage from oxygen deprivation. Scarlet fever, mumps, chicken pox, all these childhood diseases that modern children are vaccinated against or survive easily prove fatal in Tudor England. Intestinal parasites are nearly universal in children. Roundworms, tapeworms, pinworms, they colonise children's digestive systems, competing for nutrients, causing anemia and malnutrition, sometimes causing intestinal obstruction. Deworming medicines exist but are ineffective. Most children simply live with parasite burdens that would horrify modern parents. Accidents kill and maim children constantly. They fall into wells and drown. They tumble into fires and burn. They're kicked by livestock. They fall from trees or haystacks. They cut themselves with sharp tools they're using for work. They eat poisonous plants or berries. Without supervision, parents are working, older children are watching younger ones, accidents are inevitable. Child labour begins as soon as the child is capable. A 3-year-old can feed chickens. A 5-year-old can watch younger siblings or mind geese. A 7-year-old can help with harvest, weed gardens, fetch water. By 10, children do adult work, shortened only by their smaller size and lesser strength. Childhood as a protected time for growth and education doesn't exist for the poor majority. Education is available only to a fortunate few. Wealthy boys might attend grammar school, learning Latin, Greek, and classical literature. Wealthy girls receive education at home, reading, writing, music, needlework. But the vast majority of children, boys and girls alike, never learn to read or write. They're illiterate their entire lives, signing documents with marks, unable to read contracts or the Bible, dependent on others to tell them what written words say. Apprenticeship begins around age 10 to 14 for boys learning trades. The apprentice lives with the master craftsman, working long hours, often treated harshly, learning a trade over 7 years. Apprentices are beaten regularly. This is considered proper discipline. They're fed poorly, housed in workshops or attics, worked constantly. Some masters treat apprentices well, but many view them as cheap labour to be exploited. Girls typically go into service around the same age, working as maids in wealthier households. They perform heavy labour, hauling water, scrubbing floors, washing clothes, emptying chamber pots, for minimal wages. They're vulnerable to sexual exploitation by male household members. If they become pregnant, they're dismissed without references, their futures destroyed. Many end up in prostitution, having no other options. Physical discipline is harsh and routine. Parents beat children with sticks, belts, whatever comes to hand. Teachers beat students for minor infractions. Masters beat apprentices and servants. This violence is considered necessary for proper upbringing. Spare the rod and spoil the child is taken literally. The bruises and welts covering children's bodies are normal, expected, approved. Emotional abuse is equally common. Children are told they're worthless, wicked, destined for hell. Their spirits must be broken to make them obedient. Expressions of independence or willfulness are punished severely. The goal is not to nurture individual personality, but to create conforming, obedient members of their social class who never aspire beyond their station. Child mortality shapes everything. Parents who lose half their children to death learn emotional survival strategies that seem cold to moderns. They delay naming babies. They don't celebrate birthdays. One more year survived is acknowledged but not festooned with the joy moderns bring to birthdays. They prepare for loss. They hold something back, protecting themselves from the full agony of grief they'd feel if they attached completely to children who likely won't survive. Yet they do love their children. The wills of Tudor parents reveal genuine affection, specific bequests to children that show attention to their individual personalities and needs. The letters of literate parents mention children with warmth. The grief expressed in memorial brasses and church monuments is real, but the love exists alongside the knowledge that death will probably take these beloved children before they reach adulthood. If you were transported to Tudor England as a child, you'd almost certainly not survive. Your immune system, protected by modern vaccines and shielded from the disease burden of the past, would fail against measles, smallpox, dysentery. Your body, accustomed to adequate nutrition, would struggle with the poor Tudor diet. Your mind, shaped by modern parenting that values individuality and emotional well-being, would be broken by Tudor discipline that demands absolute obedience and crushes independent spirit. If you were an adult watching Tudor children, you'd be horrified by their treatment, by the labour they perform, by the beatings they endure, by the lack of protection from danger and exploitation. Your modern understanding of child development, of the importance of play and education, of children's rights, none of this exists in Tudor England. Children are small adults, expected to work and obey, valued for their economic contribution, mourned when they die but not protected with the vigilance modern parents consider essential. The mother cradles her newborn son, counting his fingers and toes, checking for obvious defects. He seems healthy. Perhaps this one will survive. Perhaps he'll be the child who makes it to adulthood, who gives her grandchildren, who justifies all the pregnancies and losses that came before. Or perhaps he'll die within weeks, another small body buried in the churchyard. Another grief to endure and move beyond, another reminder that life in Tudor England is precarious from the very first breath. She loves him already, helplessly and hopelessly, knowing better but unable to prevent her heart from bonding to this tiny, vulnerable life that is probably doomed. Women's lives and the tyranny of gender. The law is explicit. A woman married is a feme covert. Her legal existence is absorbed into that of her husband. This is coverture, the legal doctrine that defines a married woman's status in Tudor England. She cannot own property in her own name. She cannot make contracts. She cannot sue or be sued. She cannot write a will without her husband's permission. Legally, she does not exist as a separate person. She's her husband's possession, barely more autonomous than his livestock or furniture. This is the reality that would await you if you were a woman in Tudor England, a life where your legal personhood disappears upon marriage, where your body is not your own, where your choices are made by fathers and husbands, where nearly every aspect of existence is controlled by the patriarchal structures that consider women naturally inferior, mentally weak, and requiring male governance. For unmarried women, feme sole, legal personhood exists, but social status does not. An adult unmarried woman is an anomaly, viewed with suspicion. Why hasn't she married? Is she too ugly, too poor, too defective? Is she promiscuous, unwilling to submit to a husband? Spinsters are mocked and pitied. Old maids are considered unnatural, failed women who haven't fulfilled their proper purpose. Yet marriage, the expected destiny for all women, is a trap that closes around you. You marry whom your father chooses. Your preferences matter little. Marriage is an economic arrangement, a political alliance, a property transfer. Love might develop but is not expected or necessary. Your father negotiates your marriage contract with a prospective husband. Exchanging your dowry for maintenance terms, you're the commodity being traded. The marriage ceremony itself transfers ownership from father to husband. Your father gives you away, literally. You promise to obey your husband. You become his property, his chattel. If he wants to beat you, that's his right, as long as the stick is no thicker than his thumb. The origin of rule of thumb. If he wants to rape you, that's impossible by legal definition. A wife cannot refuse her husband. Your body belongs to him. Sexual consent within marriage doesn't exist as a concept. A husband cannot rape his wife because she's his property and has already given permanent consent through marriage vows. If he forces himself on you, if he hurts you, if you don't want sex but he demands it, you have no recourse, no protection, no right to refuse. Marital rape will not be recognised as a crime in England for another 4 centuries. Pregnancy follows marriage almost inevitably. You'll likely bear 5 to 8 children during your reproductive years. Each pregnancy carries risk of complications, stillbirth and maternal death. There is no contraception except abstinence, and you cannot refuse your husband. Abortion is illegal and dangerous. If attempted by drinking herbal concoctions or physical methods, it often kills the mother along with the fetus. You're trapped in cycles of pregnancy, birth and recovery with no control over your own fertility. Childbirth might kill you. The cumulative risk over multiple pregnancies approaches 10%. You watch other women die in childbed, hear their screams, know that next time it might be you. Some women write farewell letters before each labour, expecting not to survive. The fear is rational. Many women don't survive. Their husbands remarry quickly. They need wives to manage households and nurse surviving children. Between pregnancies, you work constantly. You manage the household, which means supervising servants if you're wealthy, or doing all the work yourself if you're not. You cook every meal from scratch. You preserve food for winter. You spin wool into thread and weave thread into cloth. Hours of labour for simple fabric. You sew all the family's clothes by hand. You brew ale continuously. You tend gardens. You care for children. Your work never ends. If you're poor, you also work in fields alongside your husband, planting, weeding, harvesting, while still managing all the household work. You might also earn money through spinning, sewing, taking in laundry, selling eggs or butter, brewing ale for sale, whatever brings in pennies to supplement family income. You work from before dawn until after dark, collapsing exhausted into bed, only to wake and repeat the cycle. Your education is limited by your sex. Wealthy women might learn to read, though many don't. Writing is considered less necessary. Why does a woman need to write? Some women learn music, needlework, household management. But classical education, Latin and Greek, university training, these are for men only. Women's minds are considered too weak for serious learning. Your intellectual potential is stunted by the assumption that women are naturally stupid. If you express opinions, you're a scold. If you contradict your husband, you're disobedient. If you're unhappy, you're ungrateful. There is no acceptable way to resist your subordination. Complaints are dismissed as female hysteria. Wandering womb theory holds that women's uteruses literally wander around their bodies, causing emotional instability and irrational behaviour. Your legitimate grievances are pathologized as medical problems resulting from your defective female biology. Domestic violence is common and accepted. Husbands beat wives routinely, and this is considered proper discipline. Only extreme violence, maiming, murder, crosses the line into criminal behaviour. Regular beatings that leave bruises are normal. Neighbours hear your screams and do nothing because a man is entitled to correct his wife. The church supports this, citing biblical passages about wives submitting to husbands. If your husband is cruel, abusive, or violent beyond what's considered normal, you have almost no recourse. Divorce doesn't really exist. The church permits separation in cases of extreme cruelty or adultery, but you remain married and cannot remarry. You might flee to family if they'll take you, but many families send wives back to husbands rather than harbour them. Refuges for abused women don't exist. Most women simply endure, hoping not to be beaten to death. Widowhood is actually the best legal status for women. A widow regains legal personhood. She can own property, make contracts, conduct business. She has control over her own life for perhaps the first time ever. Many widows resist remarrying despite economic pressure, preferring poverty with autonomy to prosperity with subjugation. But society pressures widows to remarry. An independent woman is unnatural and threatening. Women's sexuality is controlled rigidly, while men's is indulged. A woman who has sex outside marriage is a whore, ruined forever, unmarriageable. Her reputation is destroyed. She might be prosecuted by church courts for fornication, but men who have sex outside marriage are just being men. It's expected, even admired. The sexual double standard is absolute. Prostitution is widespread but prosecuted. Prostitutes are whipped, imprisoned, branded. Yet their clients face no punishment. The women who provide sexual services men demand are criminalised, while the men who demand those services are excused. Prostitutes are called common women. Common meaning shared by all men, property of no one man, therefore worthless. Rape victims face skepticism and blame. If you're raped, you must report it immediately, show evidence of violent resistance, prove your prior chastity. If you delayed reporting, if you couldn't fight off your attacker, if you have any sexual history, you'll be accused of consenting or even causing the rape. Conviction rates are abysmal. Many women don't bother reporting because the trial is more traumatic than the rape, and rarely results in justice. Clothing enforces gender hierarchy. Women wear layers of restrictive garments, shifts, petticoats, gowns, corsets that compress internal organs. Wealthy women wear farthingales, hooped structures that make skirts extend several feet in all directions, preventing them from walking through normal doorways or sitting in regular chairs. The clothing restricts movement, makes physical labour difficult, demonstrates that wealthy women don't work and aren't expected to. Sumptuary laws regulate who can wear what fabrics and colours, but women face additional restrictions. Certain colours and fabrics are forbidden to women of lower ranks. Clothing marks your social status and your gender, visually enforcing hierarchy. You cannot dress above your station or in ways considered immodest. Your clothes are a visible marker of your subordinate status. Working women face additional challenges. If you're a servant, you're vulnerable to sexual exploitation by male household members. If you become pregnant, you're dismissed. If you work in a trade, you're excluded from guilds and limited to lower-paid work. If you're a business owner, typically a widow continuing her husband's business, you face discrimination and skepticism. Women's work is paid less than men's for the same labour. Older women without male protection are vulnerable. Widows without family, single women without property, they often end up destitute, dependent on parish charity or begging. Elderly women are sometimes accused of witchcraft, especially if they're poor, odd, or socially marginal. The witch hunts peak later, but the pattern of scapegoating powerless old women already exists. Medical care for women is minimal and often harmful. Female complaints are dismissed or misdiagnosed. Gynecological problems are poorly understood. Menstruation is considered polluting. Women are prohibited from church during menstruation, forbidden from touching certain things, isolated as unclean. Menopause is barely acknowledged. Women's health across the lifespan is neglected by a medical profession that considers female bodies defective versions of male bodies. You, as a modern woman transported to Tudor England, would find the restrictions intolerable. Your expectation of autonomy, of bodily integrity, of the ability to make decisions about your own life, none of this exists. You would be legally a non-person if married, socially marginal if not. Your education would be considered wasted on a female mind. Your opinions would be dismissed as foolish. Your resistance would be punished. The psychological damage of living under complete male control, of having no legal rights, of being treated as property, this would break many modern women. The constant surveillance of behaviour, the impossible standards of modesty and obedience, the punishment for any assertion of self, these would be unbearable for someone raised to believe in gender equality. As twilight falls and a woman lights candles for her family's supper, moving through yet another day of endless labour and complete subordination, she might wonder if there's a different way to live. But she knows there isn't. Not for her, not in this time, not in this place. This is what it means to be a woman in Tudor England. To be property, to be controlled, to endure, and to call this endurance virtue because no other option exists. Faith, heresy, and the price of belief. The parish church stands at the centre of the village, its stone walls bearing witness to 3 Tudor monarchs and 3 radical religious transformations. The same building where Catholics worshipped under Henry VIII's peculiar English Catholicism became Protestant under Edward VI, reverted to Roman Catholicism under Mary VIII, and now under Elizabeth III is Protestant again. The building remains, but everything inside has changed. The rituals, the theology, the language, and most importantly the penalties for believing the wrong thing. You would find this instability terrifying, because your immortal soul's destination depends on choosing the correct faith. Yet the correct faith changes with each monarch. What was orthodoxy yesterday is heresy today. What earned you salvation under one ruler damns you under the next, and you must not merely adapt externally. You must genuinely believe, or at least convincingly pretend to believe, whatever the current regime demands. Under Henry VIII, England broke from Rome but remained Catholic in theology and practice. The Pope's authority was rejected, but the Mass continued in Latin. Monks and nuns still inhabited monasteries and convents. Prayers to saints were encouraged, and transubstantiation, the belief that bread and wine literally become Christ's body and blood, remained doctrine. If you denied Henry's supremacy over the English Church, you were executed for treason. If you denied Catholic doctrine, you were burned for heresy. Edward VI's brief reign brought Protestant revolution. The Mass was abolished and replaced with communion services in English. Priests were allowed to marry. Images of saints were removed from churches and destroyed. Stained glass was smashed. Wall paintings were whitewashed. Monasteries and convents dissolved, their inhabitants expelled. The Book of Common Prayer replaced the Latin Missal. If you clung to Catholic practices, you faced persecution. Then Mary I ascended, determined to return England to Roman Catholicism. The Protestant reforms were reversed. Married priests were required to abandon their wives or lose their positions. The Latin Mass returned. Papal authority was recognised again. and those who resisted burned. Nearly 300 Protestants were executed during Mary's 5-year reign, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. If you were Protestant, you conformed, fled, or died. Elizabeth I's settlement attempted a middle way, but pleased neither Catholics nor radical Protestants. The Church of England was Protestant in theology, but retained some Catholic liturgical elements. Attendance at your parish church was mandatory. Missing services incurred fines. You must at minimum conform externally, whatever you believed privately. But if your private beliefs became public, you faced severe consequences. Catholics who refused to attend Anglican services, recusants, were fined heavily, sometimes ruinously. Catholic priests, especially Jesuits, were hunted as traitors. Harbouring a priest was a capital offence. Catholics who practised their faith secretly, attending illegal masses in hidden chapels, risked property confiscation, imprisonment, or execution if discovered. Catholic faith became synonymous with treason, with loyalty to foreign powers, Spain, the Pope, against England. The machinery of persecution was extensive and efficient. Church courts monitored orthodoxy, prosecuting those who deviated from approved beliefs or practices. Informers reported neighbours who didn't attend church or who made suspicious religious statements. Torture was used to extract confessions and names of co-conspirators. Public executions of religious dissenters served as warnings to others. The executions were horrific. Heretics, those who held theologically incorrect beliefs, were burned alive. The condemned was tied to a stake surrounded by bundles of wood. If friends or family paid, the executioner might hang a bag of gunpowder around the condemned's neck, so it would explode when fire reached it, providing a quicker death. Without this mercy, the victim burned slowly, conscious, screaming until smoke suffocation or flame consumption finally brought death. Catholics executed for treason faced hanging, drawing, and quartering. Perhaps the most brutal execution devised, hung until nearly dead, cut down, castrated, disemboweled while conscious, finally beheaded and dismembered, with body parts displayed publicly. This was the fate of Catholic priests caught in England, of those who harboured them, of those convicted of plotting against Elizabeth. But you didn't need to be actively dissident to face problems. Simply being suspected of wrong beliefs could destroy you. Neighbours who disliked you might report that you didn't say Amen enthusiastically enough, that you seemed to whisper prayers in Latin, that your religious practice seemed insincere. Investigation followed. Church courts questioned you about your beliefs. If your answers were unsatisfactory, pressure mounted. The questions could be impossible to answer correctly. Theology was complex and changing. What was orthodoxy under one archbishop might be heterodoxy under another. Subtle distinctions in belief about communion, about grace, about salvation. Getting these wrong could mean prosecution. Most common people were illiterate and theologically unsophisticated. They couldn't navigate the complex doctrinal requirements. They conformed externally and hoped authorities wouldn't probe their beliefs too deeply. Radical Protestants, Puritans, who wanted to purify the Church of England of remaining Catholic elements, faced problems from the other direction. They considered Anglican worship too elaborate, too Catholic in ritual, insufficiently reformed. They wanted simpler services, no vestments, no bowing or kneeling, no ceremonies that seemed papist. But criticising the established church was dangerous. Puritans were fined, imprisoned, sometimes mutilated for their dissent. The division extended into homes and families. Children were taught whatever faith their parents held, creating the next generation of conflict. Mixed faith marriages, Protestant and Catholic spouses, created household tensions and difficult choices about children's religious education. Families divided between conformity and conscience, between safety and conviction. You could not opt out of religion. Atheism wasn't really conceivable. The existence of God was assumed, the only question being which version of Christian faith was correct. Claiming not to believe would mark you as insane or demonic. You must believe something, and what you believed determined not just your earthly fate but your eternal destination. The psychological burden was immense. You worried constantly about your soul. Were you truly saved? Had you believed correctly, performed the right rituals, received the sacraments validly? Protestant theology taught that salvation came through faith alone, that good works couldn't earn heaven, that God predestined some for salvation and others for damnation. This created profound anxiety. How could you know if you were elect or damned? Catholic theology offered more certainty through sacraments and good works, but those were illegal under Elizabeth. Secret Catholics risked their lives to receive Mass from underground priests, believing their souls depended on valid sacraments administered by properly ordained priests. The stakes were ultimate, eternity in heaven or hell, making religious conformity impossible for true believers. Witchcraft persecution, while not yet at its peak, was increasing. The belief that individuals could make pacts with the devil to gain magical powers was widely accepted. Those accused of witchcraft, overwhelmingly women, usually old, poor and socially marginal, faced torture and execution. Evidence standards were low. Confessions extracted under torture were accepted. Accusations often stemmed from personal grudges or need to explain misfortunes like failed harvests or dead livestock. The Bible was simultaneously central and inaccessible. Protestant theology emphasized Scripture as sole authority, yet most people couldn't read. Church attendance was mandatory, but services in English didn't help illiterate congregants understand. The wealthy might own Bibles, but most people encountered Scripture only through sermons and memorized prayers. You were required to base your faith on texts you couldn't read, interpreted by authorities you couldn't question. Religious holidays structured the year: Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, and numerous saints' days marked time and provided rare breaks from work. But which holidays to observe was itself politically charged. Protestants eliminated most saints' days, considering them papist superstition. Catholics continued observing them. The calendar itself became contested territory. Education was religious education. Children learned to read from the Bible or prayer book. The church controlled schools. University education was exclusively for training clergy and was thoroughly theological. Knowledge was inseparable from religion. Questioning religious authority meant questioning all authority, all knowledge, all social order. You, transported to Tudor England with modern secular sensibilities, would find the total dominance of religion oppressive and dangerous. Your assumption that belief is private, that religion is a personal choice, that the state shouldn't enforce religious conformity, none of this exists. You must believe what you're told to believe, worship as you're told to worship, and never express doubt or dissent. Your modern skepticism would be deadly, questioning miracles, doubting the Bible's literal truth, suggesting that other faiths might have validity. Any of these would mark you as dangerous. Your scientific worldview would conflict with religious explanations for natural phenomena. Your tolerance would seem like dangerous relativism that undermines truth and threatens social order. The emotional and psychological stress of navigating this landscape would be immense. The fear of eternal damnation, the pressure to conform, the surveillance of your beliefs and practices, the risk of persecution for honest doubt or sincere conviction, these would grind you down. The Tudor religious settlement created no peace, only enforced conformity masking ongoing conflict that would eventually explode into civil war. As the church bells call villagers to mandatory Sunday services, as they file into the building and recite prayers in English they half understand, as they participate in rituals that might or might not save their souls, they carry the burden of living in an age where the most important questions of ultimate meaning, of salvation, of truth, have official answers that must be accepted on pain of death. And those official answers keep changing. The dangers of disease. Part 2. Plague and Pestilence. London, summer of 1593. The city swelters under oppressive heat, and with the heat comes the terror every Londoner dreads. Plague. The disease has returned, as it does periodically, and this time it will kill perhaps 15,000 of the city's 200,000 inhabitants before cold weather stops it. The streets empty as those who can afford to flee do so. Those who remain watch anxiously for the dreaded red cross painted on doors marking infected houses, for the carts rolling through streets at night collecting corpses, for the inexorable spread of death through neighbourhoods. You would not understand plague as Tudor people experienced it. Yes, you know about disease, about epidemics, about mortality, but you've never lived through a plague outbreak where 10 to 20% of your city's population dies within months, where bodies pile up faster than they can be buried, where the social fabric tears as people abandon sick family members and flee, where normal life ceases and death becomes the overwhelming reality. Plague, bubonic plague caused by Yersinia pestis bacteria transmitted by fleas living on rats, strikes with terrifying symptoms. Within days of infection, painful swellings called buboes appear in the groin, armpits, or neck as lymph nodes swell with infection. Fever rises. The victim becomes delirious. Black spots appear on the skin as blood vessels burst beneath the surface. Most victims die within a week. The mortality rate is 50 to 70% without treatment, and Tudor England has no effective treatment. The plague's origins are not understood. Miasma theory blames bad air arising from swamps or rotting matter. Some believe it's God's punishment for sin. Others suspect the alignment of planets. No one recognizes the actual cause, rat fleas carrying bacteria. This ignorance makes prevention impossible. People try to purify air with smoke, carry herbs and spices to ward off miasma, pray for divine mercy. None of this works. The wealthy flee when plague strikes. They pack up households and relocate to country estates where population density is lower and plague less likely to spread. The royal court moves frequently during plague years, staying ahead of outbreaks. Those with means and mobility save themselves, leaving the poor to die in infected cities. For those who cannot flee, the vast majority plague means terror and helpless waiting. You watch neighbours sicken and die. You hear screams from infected houses. You see the corpse carts making their nightly rounds, the drivers calling, "Bring out your dead." You wonder if tomorrow you'll wake with the telltale bubo that signals your death sentence. Infected houses are sealed by order of authorities. A red cross is painted on the door with the words, "Lord have mercy upon us." Watchmen are posted to prevent anyone from leaving. The inhabitants, sick and healthy alike, are condemned to stay inside until everyone dies or recovers. Food is left outside. No one enters or exits. Entire families die together in these sealed houses, the healthy succumbing after nursing the sick. This quarantine policy is brutal, but reflects the observation that plague spreads from person to person. What's not understood is the mechanism that fleas jump from dying rats to humans, that the bacteria need both rat and human hosts. The quarantines somewhat slow spread by limiting contact, but they also condemn healthy family members to infection and death alongside their sick relatives. Parishes hire searchers, usually poor old women, to visit houses and determine causes of death. These searchers report plague deaths to authorities who compile weekly bills of mortality. As the numbers climb, panic spreads. When weekly deaths exceed 40, London's theatres close. When deaths reach higher thresholds, markets close, courts adjourn, business ceases. The city holds its breath, waiting for the cold weather that will end the outbreak. Mass graves receive plague victims. Individual burials are impossible when dozens die daily in a single parish. Bodies are collected at night, loaded onto carts, and dumped into large pits outside city walls. Quicklime is spread over corpses to speed decomposition. The graves fill rapidly. The smell is overwhelming. The psychological impact of mass burial, of being denied proper funeral rites, of bodies heaped together, adds trauma to grief. Plague doctors wear bizarre protective gear, leather coats, gloves, and masks with long beaks filled with herbs and spices, thinking this will filter the bad air carrying plague. They look like monstrous birds as they move through plague-stricken neighbourhoods. Their treatments are useless. Bloodletting, applying heated cups to buboes, prescribing theriac, a paste containing dozens of ingredients including viper flesh. Most plague patients who see doctors die. Those who cannot afford doctors die at similar rates. The psychological toll is immense. Parents abandon infected children. Children flee from sick parents. Spouses desert each other. The bonds of affection and duty dissolve when confronted with plague's terror. Some people act heroically, nursing the sick despite danger. But many more act out of self-preservation, and no one judges them harshly because everyone understands the fear. Commerce collapses during outbreaks. Merchants won't enter infected cities. Ships are quarantined, markets close, employment ceases. The poor, already living on the edge, face starvation alongside plague. Riots sometimes erupt as starving people break into bakeries or warehouses. Authorities respond harshly, but maintaining order becomes difficult when normal social controls break down. Crime increases. Thieves enter sealed houses through windows, stealing from the dead and dying. Con artists sell fake plague remedies, useless amulets, prayers written on paper to be swallowed, quack medicines. Bodies are robbed before burial. Some looters contract plague from infected clothing and goods, becoming victims themselves. The plague is not a single outbreak, but recurring nightmare. London experiences serious plague years in 1563, 1578-79, 1593, and 1603, among others, each killing thousands. The disease never truly disappears, with small numbers of cases most years and periodic explosions when conditions favour transmission. Londoners live with plague as a constant background threat that occasionally surges into catastrophe. Other epidemic diseases strike periodically. Sweating sickness, though it had disappeared by the 1550s, remains in living memory, a mysterious disease that killed within hours. Smallpox outbreaks devastate populations, killing some and leaving survivors scarred and sometimes blind. Typhus rages through crowded ships, prisons, and military camps. Influenza sweeps through periodically, killing the vulnerable. Syphilis, the French pox or Great Pox, arrived in Europe in the 1490s and spreads widely by the late Tudor period. Its symptoms are horrific: chancres, rashes, lesions that eat through tissue and bone, madness, and death over years of suffering. Treatment with mercury, rubbed on sores or inhaled as vapour, is nearly as terrible as the disease, causing mercury poisoning that makes hair and teeth fall out. A night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury becomes a warning about the price of promiscuity. Leprosy, while declining, still exists. Lepers are segregated in leper houses outside town walls, forced to ring bells when approaching so others can avoid them, forbidden from many public spaces. The disease carries enormous stigma. Diagnosis means social death even before physical death. Some conditions misdiagnosed as leprosy are probably other diseases, but once labelled a leper, you're cast out from society regardless. Tuberculosis, consumption, kills slowly over months or years as the bacteria destroy lungs. Victims cough blood, waste away, struggle for breath. There is no treatment, only the grim certainty of death. The disease is so common that its symptoms are well known. People speak of galloping consumption that kills quickly versus the slower decline that takes years. Either way, diagnosis is a death sentence. Dysentery, bloody diarrhea from bacterial infection, strikes in summer, killing through dehydration. Typhoid fever, spread through contaminated water, causes high fever, delirium, and characteristic rash. Both diseases ravage cities with inadequate sanitation and contaminated water supplies. Both kill thousands yearly. Children's diseases that we now vaccinate against ravage each generation. Diphtheria slowly strangles as the throat swells closed. Whooping cough causes such violent coughing that children break ribs or rupture blood vessels. Scarlet fever turns skin red and hot before sometimes proving fatal. Measles kills between 10 and 30% of infected children. Every childhood disease that modern medicine prevents or treats easily proves deadly in Tudor England. Parasitic infections are endemic. Malaria, agu, is common in marshy areas, causing periodic fevers, chills, and sweats. Without quinine, victims endure recurring attacks that weaken them over years. Guinea worms burrow under skin, growing to 3 feet long before emerging painfully through ulcers. Tapeworms, roundworms, flukes, dozens of parasitic species colonize human bodies, competing for nutrients, causing illness, sometimes death. You would be horrified by disease prevalence and lethality in Tudor England. Your expectation that illness will be diagnosed, treated, and cured would be violently disproven. Your assumption that you'll likely live to 70 or 80 would confront the reality that life expectancy at birth is 35 to 40 years, not because everyone dies at 40, but because so many die as children that the average is pulled down. If you survived childhood diseases your immune system hasn't been trained to resist, if you avoided plague outbreaks, if you escaped tuberculosis, typhus, typhoid, dysentery, and parasitic infections, if you survived accidents and violence, even then, you'd likely develop chronic conditions that would kill you before 50. Bad teeth, leading to abscessed infections spreading to brain or heart. Kidney stones causing sepsis. Gallstones blocking ducts and causing fatal infections. Hernias strangulating intestines. any of dozens of conditions modern medicine treats routinely, but Tudor medicine cannot. The cumulative disease burden, the constant low-level infections, the parasites, the malnutrition, the chronic conditions would wear you down even if no single disease killed you. You'd feel perpetually unwell, never experiencing the health and vitality modern people take for granted. You'd learn to function while mildly sick because being perfectly healthy was a rare temporary state, not a normal baseline. As the plague outbreak of 1593 finally wanes with autumn's arrival, as the death counts in the bills of mortality decline, as Londoners emerge from isolation and life slowly resumes, everyone knows this is merely reprieve. Plague will return, disease will continue killing. The dance with death will continue until death claims each dancer. This is life in Tudor England. Disease as constant companion, death as ever-present threat, health as temporary blessing rather than expected norm, crime, vagabondage, and social control. The roads of Tudor England are dangerous places, especially as dusk approaches. A lone traveller walking between villages risks encountering vagabonds, masterless men without employment, without fixed residence, without ties to any community. These wanderers, displaced by agricultural changes that enclosed common lands and expelled tenant farmers, roam the countryside begging, stealing, sometimes forming bands that rob travellers and terrorise isolated farms. You would find the obsession with vagabondage initially puzzling, then terrifying as you realised you could easily become one of these despised wanderers. The Tudor economy is not designed for mobility or individual freedom. You're supposed to remain in your parish, in your proper place, under the authority of your betters. Moving about requires permission. Seeking work elsewhere without authorization makes you suspect. Being unemployed makes you criminal. The Vagabonds Act of 1547 reveals the harshness of Tudor attitudes toward the mobile poor. A person found guilty of vagabondage for the first offence is branded with a V on the chest and forced into slavery for 2 years to whoever reports them. Second offence brings slavery for life. Third offence brings execution. Children of vagabonds can be taken from their parents and forced into apprenticeships until age 24 for boys, 20 for girls. This law proves too harsh even by Tudor standards. It's repealed after 2 years, but its replacement is hardly gentle. Vagabonds are whipped until bloody, bored through the ear with a hot iron, or imprisoned in houses of correction where they're forced to work breaking stones or beating hemp. The goal is not rehabilitation but punishment and deterrence. The vagabond class must be controlled through terror because they represent disorder, masterlessness, the breakdown of proper social hierarchy. But what creates vagabonds? Agricultural enclosure, landlords fencing common lands for sheep pasture, displaces tenant farmers who've worked land for generations. Monasteries dissolved by Henry VIII no longer provide charity to the poor. Economic changes make some crafts obsolete. Poor harvests create unemployment. Veterans discharged after wars have no work to return to. The Tudor economy creates vagabonds, then criminalises them for existing. You could easily join their ranks, lose your tenancy through eviction or inability to pay rent, and you have no home. Leave your parish seeking work without proper documentation, and you're vagrant. Be unemployed for more than 3 days, and you're liable to arrest. The boundary between respectable poverty and criminal vagabondage is thin and easily crossed. Bad luck, a vindictive landlord, an economic downturn, any of these could make you an outlaw. The roads themselves are hazardous. Highways, the term means main roads, not modern motorways, are often little more than dirt tracks that become impassable mud in wet weather. Bridges are few, most rivers are forded, which is dangerous when water is high. Road maintenance is minimal and depends on parishes that lack resources and motivation. Travellers must navigate poorly marked routes, hope they don't get lost, avoid accidents in difficult terrain. Robbery is common enough that travellers take precautions. Those who can afford it travel in groups or hire armed escorts. The wealthy travel with retinues of servants. But most people travelling, peddlers, labourers seeking work, apprentices going to new masters, cannot afford protection. They're vulnerable to highway robbery that can turn violent if victims resist. The thieves themselves are often desperate rather than professional criminals. Unemployed men who've exhausted other options turn to robbery. Disbanded soldiers use military skills for banditry. Some form organised gangs with leaders and territories, but many are opportunistic thieves taking advantage of vulnerable targets. The death penalty for theft doesn't deter people who face starvation as the alternative. Urban crime is equally problematic. London especially is dangerous after dark. The city lacks organised police force. Law enforcement depends on parish constables, usually unpaid citizens serving reluctantly for a year, and night watchmen who are often elderly, poorly equipped, and easily bribed or intimidated. Criminals operate with relative impunity. Cut purses, pickpockets who literally cut purses from belts with sharp knives, work crowded markets and fairs. Confidence tricksters scam the gullible with rigged games or fake merchandise. Prostitutes lure victims to alleys where accomplices rob them. Burglars break into homes and shops. Murder happens regularly, often in drunken brawls in alehouses or over gambling disputes, but sometimes in planned robberies gone wrong. The criminal underworld has its own geography and language. Certain neighbourhoods in London are known havens for criminals where authorities venture cautiously. Alehouses serve as meeting places where stolen goods are fenced. A whole argot, thieves' cant, allows criminals to communicate in code that outsiders don't understand. This subculture is sophisticated and adaptive, developing techniques to evade authorities. Prisons themselves are schools for crime. Different offenders mix together. Debtors, thieves, those awaiting trial, convicted criminals awaiting execution. The experienced teach the novice. Connections are made, plans are hatched. Rather than reforming criminals, imprisonment often creates better trained, more connected criminals who emerge more dangerous than when they entered. Corruption pervades law enforcement. Constables can be bribed to ignore crimes or arrest inconvenient people on false charges. Watchmen alert criminals when they're patrolling, giving them free rein to operate elsewhere. Justices of the peace favour wealthy defendants and hammer poor ones. The system doesn't prevent crime, it manages it, ensuring the wealthy are protected while the poor police each other. You would live in constant low-level fear. The threat of robbery on roads, of cut purses in markets, of violence in alehouses, of false accusations leading to arrest. These would shape your behaviour. You'd travel as little as possible. You'd guard possessions jealously. You'd avoid confrontations. You'd be suspicious of strangers. Trust would be limited to known community members, and even then maintained carefully. The accusation of crime could destroy you even if you're innocent. Reputation matters enormously in determining guilt. If you're known as troublesome, you're more likely to be convicted. Witnesses can be pressured or bribed to testify falsely. Confessions can be extracted through torture or coercion. The judicial system is not designed to find truth, but to maintain order by punishing those who threaten it. Property crime is punished far more harshly than violence. Steal goods worth more than a shilling, about a day's wages for a labourer, and you can hang. But start a drunken brawl that injures someone, and you might face only a fine. The hierarchy of values is clear. Property, especially property of the wealthy, is more important than the bodies of the poor. The legal system protects privilege. Benefit of clergy, the ability to escape hanging by proving literacy, creates absurd inequalities. An educated thief who can read Psalm 51 escapes with a brand on the thumb. An illiterate thief who stole the same amount hangs. Literacy becomes literally life or death. Some criminals memorize the neck verse despite being unable to read, gaming a system that already favours the educated. Sanctuary, the ancient right to claim protection in churches, is being eroded. Henry VIII reduces the number of sanctuary locations. Certain crimes are declared non-sanctuarable. The right is increasingly seen as harbouring criminals rather than showing Christian mercy. By Elizabeth's reign, sanctuary is effectively dead, another medieval protection against authority eliminated by the centralising Tudor state. As darkness falls and honest people bar their doors, the night belongs to the lawless. The watchmen make their rounds, calling the hours, their lanterns bobbing through dark streets. The criminals emerge from hiding places, watching for opportunities. The roads empty except for desperate travellers who couldn't reach safety before sunset. And you, if you're wise, stay inside, door barred, knowing that the thin protections of law and community are even thinner after dark, when crime flourishes and the boundaries between order and chaos blur. Famine, malnutrition, and the gnawing hunger. The harvest of 1594 is poor. Heavy rains through summer waterlogged fields, rot grain in the ground, prevent ripening of what survives. Autumn's yield is perhaps 2/3 of normal. Bad, but villagers have faced worse. Grain reserves from previous years will see people through, though belts will tighten. But then 1595's harvest fails even more completely, and 1596 is catastrophic, and 1597 brings little improvement. 4 successive harvest failures create the worst famine in Tudor England's history. You would not understand true hunger. You've been hungry, missed meals, felt discomfort, counted calories, gone on diets. But you've never experienced the consuming, desperate, maddening hunger that comes from months of inadequate food, from watching your body consume itself, from thinking about nothing but food every waking moment, from knowing that starvation is not a metaphor but an approaching reality. The progression of famine follows a grim pattern. Initially, as food becomes scarce, prices rise. The poor, who spend 70 to 80% of their income on food even in good years, cannot afford rising prices. They eat less. They switch to cheaper grains, from wheat to rye, from rye to barley, from barley to oats. They supplement with anything remotely edible. Acorns ground into flour, bark stripped from trees, roots dug from fields, grass boiled into thin soup. As months pass and the next harvest also fails, desperation intensifies. Families eat seed grain they should save for planting, dooming future harvests. They slaughter breeding animals they should preserve. They sell possessions, tools, clothes, furniture, for a few pennies to buy bread. They send children away to beg in towns, hoping strangers will feed them. They watch helplessly as the young and old waste away first, their small bodies lacking reserves to survive deprivation. Malnutrition progresses through visible stages. First, the body depletes fat reserves. People become gaunt, their clothes hanging loose, their faces hollowed. Then muscle breaks down as the body cannibalizes itself for protein. Physical weakness makes work impossible, creating a vicious cycle, unable to work, unable to earn money for food, unable to eat enough to regain strength. Women stop menstruating, children stop growing, hair falls out, skin develops sores that won't heal. Edema appears in late stages, swelling from fluid accumulation as low protein levels fail to keep fluid in blood vessels. The belly swells, creating the paradoxical appearance of fullness on a starving body. Limbs puff up. The face becomes puffy and distorted. This signals approaching death. When edema appears, survival is unlikely. The mind deteriorates alongside the body. Concentration becomes impossible. Memories fade. Personality changes. Some people become apathetic and listless, lying down to wait for death. Others become aggressive and desperate, fighting over scraps. Children cry constantly from hunger pains, then become eerily quiet as they lack energy even to cry. The psychological torment of watching loved ones starve while being unable to help creates trauma that persists in survivors. Death comes in various ways during famine, often not directly from starvation. Weakened immune systems succumb to diseases they might normally resist. Typhus, dysentery, influenza, all flourish in malnourished populations. Infected wounds don't heal. Minor illnesses become fatal. More people die from disease during and after famines than from starvation itself, but the malnutrition is the underlying cause. Crime explodes during famine years. Theft of food increases despite harsh penalties. People risk hanging rather than starve slowly. Riots erupt when grain ships attempt to export food while locals starve. Markets are attacked, grain seized, bakers' shops looted. Authorities respond with violence, hanging rioters as examples, but desperation drives more crime than fear can prevent. The 1590s famines strain social bonds to breaking. Communities that normally practice mutual aid find resources exhausted. Charities cannot cope with demand. Parish poor relief, minimal in good times, collapses under overwhelming need. The wealthy hoard grain, waiting for prices to rise further, profiteering from others' desperation. Some show Christian charity, distributing food to the poor, but many do not. Mortality during the 1590s famines varies by region, but reaches horrific levels in the worst affected areas. Some parishes lose 20 to 30% of their population. The young and old die first, but the famine kills adults in their prime as well. The churchyard fills with fresh graves, so many that individual burials become impossible. Bodies are buried in mass graves, quicklime to speed decomposition, with minimal ceremony. The psychological impact extends beyond the immediate crisis. Those who survive never forget the hunger. They hoard food compulsively afterward, unable to feel secure even when plenty returns. They dream of food, wake from nightmares about starvation. They cannot enjoy meals without guilt for having survived when others died. The trauma is intergenerational. Parents who survived famine raise children in perpetual anxiety about food security. The famine exposes brutal economic realities. Grain prices rise 5-fold or more in the worst years. Those who own grain, landlords, wealthy farmers, grain merchants, profit enormously. They can afford to hold grain off the market, waiting for prices to peak. Meanwhile, those who grow grain for others, tenant farmers who owe rent in kind, labourers paid partly in grain rations, see their sustenance exported for profit while they starve. The government's response is inadequate. The Privy Council orders grain not be exported, that markets be supplied regularly, that hoarding be prosecuted, that the wealthy provide charity. These orders are ignored or circumvented. Enforcement is impossible across the kingdom. The market operates according to profit, not need. Those with grain sell to the highest bidder, not to the starving poor. Some towns show foresight, maintaining grain reserves for emergencies. These municipalities suffer less during the 1590s famines, but most places lack such reserves and face the full horror of failed harvests with no buffer. The lesson, that community food security requires planning and investment, is learned and forgotten repeatedly throughout history. You would be shocked by how quickly social order collapses when food becomes scarce. The assumption that civilization is robust, that systems will cope, that somehow everyone will be fed. These are proven false. When crops fail and reserves deplete, people starve, and neither government nor charity can prevent it. The margin between civilization and starvation is thinner than you imagine. Even if you personally survived the 1590s famines, even if you had money to buy expensive grain or connections that provided access to food, you would be marked by the experience. Watching neighbours starve, hearing children crying from hunger, seeing bodies in the streets, knowing that your survival was luck or privilege rather than virtue, this would haunt you. The guilt of survival, the trauma of witnessing mass death, the fear that it could happen again, these would never leave you. The famine finally breaks in 1598 when harvests improve. Grain becomes available, prices drop, markets stabilise. Life returns to something like normal, though with fewer people. Thousands have died, thousands more fled to seek survival elsewhere. The survivors rebuild lives, replant fields, try to forget the horror, but they know, with grim certainty, that it could happen again. Another series of poor harvests, another convergence of bad weather and bad luck, and the nightmare would return. As the 1590s end and the new century approaches, as England slowly recovers from the worst famine of Tudor times, the lesson is clear. Survival depends not on virtue or hard work, but on the caprice of weather, on the success of harvests, on the thin margin between sufficiency and starvation. You are always one bad year, or two, or three, away from desperate hunger that would drive you to things you cannot imagine until confronted with the choice between crime and death, between preserving morality and preserving life. And in that moment, you would learn what all famine survivors know, that principles are luxuries of the well-fed, and that hunger will make you do anything, absolutely anything to survive. Sanitation, filth, and disease vectors. Stand on London Bridge on a summer afternoon in 1555, and the stench will overwhelm you before you comprehend its sources. The Thames River below, the city's sewer and its water supply, flows thick with human waste, animal carcasses, butcher's offal, tanner's chemicals, and every variety of refuse that a city of 100,000 people produces. Chamber pots are emptied from windows with, at best, a shouted warning. Butchers slaughter animals in streets, leaving blood and entrails to rot. Open sewers, called kennels, run down the centre of streets, clogged with filth. You would find Tudor sanitation, or lack thereof, incomprehensible and intolerable. Your modern expectation that waste is disposed of properly, that streets are clean, that water is pure, that diseases are prevented through hygiene, none of this exists. Tudor cities and towns are cesspits of filth that would violate every modern health code imaginable. Let us examine a typical London street. The roadway itself is unpaved dirt or, in better areas, cobblestones with gaps where filth accumulates. Down the centre runs the kennel, an open gutter that theoretically carries rainwater and waste to the Thames. In practice, it's clogged with trash, animal dung, human excrement, food waste, and dead animals. In dry weather, it stinks. In wet weather, it overflows, flooding streets with sewage. Houses lack toilets, as you understand them. Wealthy homes have garderobes, closets with seats built over shafts that drop waste into cesspits below the house or into the river if the house backs onto it. The smell is managed with herbs and perfumes, imperfectly. Most houses have chamber pots that are emptied into the street or into cesspits in small yards behind houses. The cesspits, deep holes lined with stone or brick where waste accumulates, require periodic emptying. This is the job of gong farmers or night soil men who work after dark, hence night soil, digging out the accumulated waste and carting it away to be sold as fertiliser for fields outside the city. The work is vile, dangerous. Men sometimes asphyxiate from methane gas in deep pits, and socially despised. But it's necessary and actually quite lucrative due to the unpleasant nature of the work. But many cesspits are poorly maintained or never emptied. They overflow, seeping into groundwater. They contaminate wells that provide drinking water. Wells and cesspits often sit side by side in small yards, separated by a few feet of soil that does nothing to prevent seepage. The connection between contaminated water and disease is not understood, so the cycle of pollution and infection continues unchecked. Water supply is a constant problem. London has several conduits, pipes bringing clean water from springs outside the city to public fountains. But the supply is insufficient and irregular. Most people drink from the Thames or from wells, both contaminated. Water carriers sell relatively cleaner water from springs, but it's expensive. Most people make do with whatever water is available, regardless of quality. The rich have servants who fetch water daily, allowing somewhat more frequent washing and better quality drinking water. The poor use contaminated local sources. This creates a disease gradient. The wealthy, despite their other health risks, suffer less from waterborne diseases than the poor who drink the worst water. But no one is safe. Cholera, typhoid, and dysentery kill across all classes. Bathing is rare for reasons both cultural and practical. The Protestant Reformation closed public bathhouses, associating them with Catholic decadence and sexual license. Private bathing requires heating large quantities of water, which is labour-intensive and expensive. Most people wash hands and faces occasionally, but full-body bathing happens infrequently, monthly for the fastidious, annually for many, never for some. The absence of bathing means bodies are chronically dirty. Skin accumulated layers of grime, sweat and dead cells. This provides excellent habitat for parasites. Lice live in hair and clothing, impossible to fully eradicate without hot water washing and regular bathing. Fleas jump from person to person, spreading plague when they're infected. Scabies mites burrow under skin, causing intense itching and sores. Everyone has parasites. It's normal. Clothing is rarely washed because the process is so labour-intensive. Outer garments might never be washed, just brushed and aired. Undergarments, linen shifts and shirts worn next to skin are changed more regularly if you own multiples, but many poor people own only one set of clothes that they wear constantly until the fabric literally disintegrates. The smell of unwashed bodies and unwashed clothes is ubiquitous and accepted. Laundry, when it happens, uses cold or barely warm water. Heating large quantities of water is too expensive. Soap is harsh lye soap that damages both fabric and skin. Clothes are beaten on rocks or boards to loosen dirt, rinsed inadequately, and hung to dry. The process takes all day and is exhausting. Most women do laundry monthly at best, often less frequently. Food handling is primitive by modern standards. Meat hangs in open markets, exposed to flies, dust and animal pests. Butchers work in the street, blood pooling around their stalls, attracting vermin. Milk is sold from buckets carried through the streets, often adulterated with water, contaminated water naturally, to stretch volume. Bread is baked in ovens also used for other purposes, cross-contaminating it. Rats are everywhere, in houses, in granaries, in markets, in ships. They're so common they're barely noted unless present in unusual numbers. Cats are valued for keeping rat populations somewhat in check, but the balance always favours the rats. These rats carry fleas, which carry plague, creating the transmission chain that periodically devastates England. But the connection isn't understood, so rats are tolerated as unpleasant, but inevitable. Flies swarm in summer, attracted by the omnipresent filth. They land on food, on wounds, on waste, on food again, spreading bacteria with each landing. Typhoid and dysentery spread partly through flies that contaminate food. The concept of disease vectors, creatures that transmit pathogens, doesn't exist. Flies are annoying but not recognised as dangerous. Animal waste covers streets and yards. Horses, the primary transportation, produce vast quantities of dung. Pigs, chickens, and sometimes cows are kept in city yards and even in houses. Their waste mixes with human waste in the general filth. In rural areas, livestock live in houses with families during winter for warmth, with predictable effects on indoor sanitation. Disposal of human corpses is often inadequate. The poor are buried in mass graves that are reopened repeatedly, adding new bodies to partially decomposed older ones. Churchyards become overcrowded with burials in layers, the soil contaminated with decomposition products. During plague years, bodies are buried so shallowly that dogs sometimes dig them up. Industrial waste adds to the pollution. Tanners cure hides in vats of urine and dung, producing horrific smells and toxic runoff. Dyers use chemicals that poison water. Smiths, brewers, and other craftsmen dump waste into streets and streams. The concept of waste management doesn't exist. Everything is simply discarded into the nearest convenient location. You would be ill constantly from this filth. Diarrheal diseases from contaminated water, skin infections from poor hygiene, respiratory problems from exposure to human and animal waste, parasitic infections from the vector-rich environment. Your immune system would struggle against the constant bacterial and parasitic assault. The psychological burden would be equally challenging. Modern people are accustomed to cleanliness, to the absence of bad smells, to the reliable removal of waste, the constant filth, the inescapable stench, the visual assault of garbage and excrement everywhere. This would revolt you. You could never adjust completely to conditions that seem designed to spread disease and misery. As night falls and you return to your dwelling, as you eat food prepared in these unsanitary conditions, drink water drawn from contaminated sources, lie down in dirty bedding infested with parasites, in a room that smells of smoke and unwashed bodies, you would finally understand that disease in Tudor England is not primarily bad luck or divine punishment, but the inevitable consequence of living in filth that modern people would consider intolerable. And you would know that no amount of personal fastidiousness could protect you when the entire environment is contaminated. Marriage, sex, and reproduction. The marriage negotiations have concluded. The dowry has been agreed. £20 in coin, a feather bed, 2 brass pots, and some linens. The bride is 16, the groom 24. They've met twice, briefly, under supervision. In 3 weeks they'll marry, and on their wedding night they'll be expected to consummate a union between near strangers while drunk wedding guests bang on the door, making crude jokes about the activities within. You would find Tudor marriage alien and disturbing. Marriage is not about love, compatibility, or personal fulfillment, but about economic alliance, property transfer, and reproduction. Romantic love might develop after marriage. Many couples do grow to love each other, but it's not expected or required. The wedding is a business transaction where women are the commodity being exchanged. For most people, marriage happens in their mid-20s, later than often assumed. Men must establish themselves economically before marrying, which takes years. Women wait for suitable matches to be arranged. But nobles marry younger, sometimes dramatically so. Margaret Beaufort was 12 when she gave birth to the future Henry VII, a marriage and pregnancy that nearly killed her and left her unable to have more children. The wedding itself is a public spectacle. Bands are called in church for 3 consecutive Sundays, announcing the intended marriage and inviting objections. The ceremony happens in church, where the couple exchange vows before witnesses. After the religious service comes the feast, with as much food and drink as the families can afford. The quantity and quality of the wedding feast demonstrates family status and creates social obligations. The bedding ceremony follows the feast. The couple is escorted to bed by drunk, rowdy guests who make crude jokes, offer unwanted advice, and sometimes stay in the room to witness the consummation. In noble families, proof of consummation might be required. Inspection of the bloody sheets the next morning, presented as evidence the bride was a virgin and the marriage was completed. The lack of privacy, the performance pressure, the drunken audience, this would traumatize most modern couples. Sex within marriage is an obligation, not a pleasure. Women are expected to submit to husbands' demands. Men are expected to perform their conjugal duties to produce children. Pleasure, especially female pleasure, is suspect. Women who enjoy sex too much might be considered wanton or oversexed. The ideal wife endures sex dutifully to fulfill reproductive obligations. Contraception barely exists. The Catholic Church forbids it. Protestant churches discourage it. Some folk methods are attempted, herbal potions, pessaries, coitus interruptus, but effectiveness is limited and knowledge restricted. Most couples have no way to prevent pregnancy except abstinence, which is neither expected nor commonly practiced within marriage. Consequently, married women spend most of their fertile years either pregnant or nursing, with an average of 5 to 8 births per woman surviving to adulthood. And accounting for miscarriages and stillbirths, women might be pregnant 10 or more times during their reproductive years. Each pregnancy carries risk. Each birth might kill. The cumulative toll on women's bodies is devastating. Sexual ignorance is profound, especially among sheltered upper-class women. Brides might not understand what's expected on their wedding night. Grooms, having visited prostitutes or fumbled with servants, might be marginally more knowledgeable but often misinformed. The lack of sex education creates painful first experiences that set the tone for marital relations. Consummation of marriage is necessary to make it valid and indissoluble. Unconsummated marriages can be annulled, which creates pressure to complete the act even when physically or emotionally painful. Some marriages, especially those arranged between children, or where one party is significantly older, remain unconsummated for years, creating legal ambiguity about the marriage's validity. Adultery is punished, but asymmetrically. A wife's adultery is serious crime. It risks introducing another man's child into the family line, corrupting inheritance. She can be divorced, legally separated, remarriage is impossible, financially ruined, and socially destroyed. A husband's adultery is tacitly accepted as normal male behaviour. Men visit prostitutes, keep mistresses, father bastards, with minimal social consequences. Prostitution is widespread but illegal, and regularly prosecuted. Prostitutes are whipped, imprisoned, branded. They're excluded from church until they repent publicly. But the demand for prostitution, from unmarried men, from married men whose wives are pregnant or recently delivered, from men who want sex without reproductive consequences, ensures a steady supply despite the risks. Homosexuality is a capital crime. Buggery, anal sex, whether with men, women or animals, is punishable by death under laws passed by Henry VIII. Prosecutions are rare. The crime is difficult to prove and involves penetrating intimate aspects of private life, but the threat creates pervasive fear. Homosexual individuals hide their orientation, marry conventionally, live in fear of exposure. Sexually transmitted diseases are common and incurable. Syphilis, the French pox, spreads through sexual contact and progresses through horrific stages: chancres, rashes, lesions that eat through tissue and bone, eventual madness and death. Treatment with mercury is nearly as terrible as the disease. Men infect wives who infect babies through pregnancy or breastfeeding. The disease is stigmatized, but the stigma doesn't prevent transmission. Childbirth dominates married women's lives. Pregnancy is announced when the woman quickens, feels fetal movement, usually around 4 months. No earlier confirmation is possible, so early miscarriages are common and might not be recognized as pregnancy loss. The pregnancy advances without medical care, no ultrasounds, no monitoring, no way to detect problems. Labour begins without warning or control over timing. The midwife is summoned, female relatives gather, men are excluded. The labouring woman works through pain that can last hours or days, without effective pain relief. Herbs might be given, raspberry leaf tea, ergot for persistent labour, but these are of limited effectiveness. Mostly women endure. The dangers are manifold: prolonged labour exhausting mother and baby, hemorrhage from placental problems, infection, eclampsia causing seizures, obstructed labour when the baby cannot pass through the pelvis. The midwife's interventions are limited: turning the baby if malpositioned, manually removing retained placenta, applying pressure to stop bleeding. If these fail, mother, baby, or both die. Some women die quickly, bleeding out during or immediately after delivery. Others develop puerperal fever, infection of the uterus, days later suffering through fever, pain, and delirium before death. The infection has no treatment. Once symptoms appear, death usually follows within days. Every woman who gives birth knows she might not survive. Child spacing happens naturally through breastfeeding, which suppresses fertility somewhat, but not reliably. Women become pregnant while still nursing toddlers, sometimes bearing babies only a year apart. The close spacing exhausts mothers' bodies and reduces survival chances for closely spaced children competing for maternal resources. Miscarriage and stillbirth are common. Perhaps 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in miscarriage. Stillbirth rates are high. Babies die in utero from infections, malformations, umbilical cord accidents. These losses are mourned but also grimly expected. Women who carry to term successfully feel relieved rather than confident. So much can still go wrong during birth. The intimate physical relationship between spouses is unromantic by modern standards. Sex happens in darkness, in cold bedrooms, often while drunk. Bodies are unwashed. Privacy is minimal. Children, servants, other family members might be in adjacent rooms, able to hear everything. The cultural message is that sex is sinful but necessary for reproduction, not something to be enjoyed. Yet some couples do find affection, pleasure, even love. Letters between spouses reveal genuine warmth. Some men grieve deeply when wives die. Some wives mourn deceased husbands sincerely. The system of arranged marriage doesn't preclude love developing, and many couples find ways to build genuine partnerships within the constraints. You, transported to Tudor England, would find the sexual culture oppressive and the marriage system oppressive. Your expectations of choosing your own spouse, of marital equality, of sex as mutual pleasure, of reproductive control, none exist. Women especially would find the complete subordination intolerable. Men would find the lack of emotional intimacy and genuine partnership unsatisfying, even if they benefited from male privilege. As the marriage night concludes and the young couple, exhausted and embarrassed, finally find themselves alone, they face the reality of sharing life with a near stranger. They will eat together, work together, sleep in the same bed, produce children together, age together. They will do all this without the foundation of romantic love, without having chosen each other freely, without confidence that they're compatible. And they will make it work or not, because divorce is impossible and separation socially catastrophic. This is marriage in Tudor England, a bond that's economic, reproductive, and permanent, regardless of affection or happiness. The court, politics, and sudden death. The Duke of Norfolk returns to his London townhouse after a day at court, confident that his plans are proceeding well. He's been negotiating secretly to marry Mary, Queen of Scots, currently imprisoned by Elizabeth. The match would unite powerful Catholic claims to the English throne and strengthen his own position immensely. What the Duke doesn't know is that Elizabeth's spy master, Francis Walsingham, has intercepted his letters, knows his plans, and is preparing to arrest him for treason. Within weeks, Norfolk will be in the Tower. Within months, he'll be executed. His confidence tonight is his epitaph. You would find Tudor court politics incomprehensible and terrifying. The court is where power resides, where fortunes are made and lost, where a wrong word or perceived slight can lead to execution. It operates according to rules of favour, patronage, and factional intrigue that make modern politics seem transparent and predictable by comparison. The monarch's favour is everything. With it you prosper. Offices, lands, monopolies, pensions flow to favourites. Without it, you're nothing, and favour is capricious, based on royal mood, appearance, flattery, service, connections, accidents of timing. You can do everything right and still fall from grace. You can be mediocre but well-timed in your flattery and rise high. Henry VIII's court was particularly dangerous. His paranoia intensified with age. His mobility, limited by a leg ulcer that wouldn't heal, made him dependent on courtiers' reports about events he couldn't witness personally. He believed accusations easily, condemned friends quickly, and signed execution warrants without much deliberation. 5 of his 6 wives experienced his favour turning to deadly suspicion. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, orchestrated the dissolution of monasteries and accumulated enormous power. He seemed untouchable. Then he arranged Henry's marriage to Anne of Cleves, which the king found physically repulsive. Within months, Cromwell was arrested, stripped of titles, and executed. Years of loyal service meant nothing when the king's favour turned. Anne Boleyn experienced the same whiplash reversal. Henry pursued her obsessively, broke from Rome to marry her, crowned her queen. 3 years later, she was arrested on fabricated charges of adultery, incest, and treason. Within days, she was dead, beheaded on Tower Green. Her crime was failing to produce a male heir and losing the king's affection. The charges were absurd, but truth didn't matter when the king wanted her gone. The Tower of London looms over the city, fortress and palace and prison combined. Its most famous residents are those awaiting execution. To be sent to the Tower is usually death sentence, though the interval between arrest and execution might be weeks or months. During that time, prisoners await their fate in cells ranging from reasonably comfortable, for nobles who can pay, to horrific dungeons. Torture happens in the Tower, despite being technically illegal except in treason cases. The rack stretches bodies until joints dislocate and tendons tear. The scavenger's daughter compresses the body until blood seeps from nose and ears. The manacles suspend prisoners by wrists until shoulders dislocate. These tortures extract confessions and implicate others. The confessions are then used as evidence in trials. Treason is defined broadly and flexibly. Speaking against the king is treason. Predicting the king's death is treason. Supporting the wrong claimant to the throne is treason. Refusing to acknowledge the king as head of the church is treason. The definition expands to encompass whatever the monarch wants it to encompass. No one is safe because the boundaries are deliberately unclear. Factions at court vie for influence through patronage networks. If your patron rises, you rise with them. If they fall, you fall, sometimes to execution if their fall involves treason. Choosing the right faction is critical and nearly impossible. Alliances shift. Today's ally is tomorrow's enemy. Neutrality is impossible. Not choosing a side offends all sides. Spies are everywhere. Walsingham's intelligence network penetrates every corner of English society and extends throughout Europe. Ciphered letters are intercepted and decoded. Informants report conversations. Servants betray masters. The surveillance state operates efficiently despite primitive technology because human networks of informants create panopticon effect. Everyone knows they might be watched, so everyone polices their own behaviour. Elizabeth's court, while less bloodthirsty than her father's, is no less treacherous. The stakes remain ultimate. Favour means wealth and power. Disfavour means ruin or death. But Elizabeth prefers to keep nobles dependent and competing, rather than executing them wholesale. She plays courtiers against each other, promising much and delivering little, maintaining control through manipulation rather than terror. The expense of court life bankrupts many nobles. You must maintain elaborate households, dress extravagantly, host expensive entertainments, give generous gifts to the queen and important courtiers. All this costs far more than most noble incomes can sustain. Many nobles go deeply into debt maintaining court appearances, becoming financially dependent on royal grants and offices. Women at court face particular vulnerabilities. Ladies-in-waiting serve the queen but are also decorative objects, potential romantic interest for courtiers, and pieces in political games. Elizabeth demands her ladies remain unmarried, dedicating themselves to her service. Those who secretly marry or become pregnant face her fury and dismissal. The queen's jealousy and need for control extends to her female attendants' personal lives. Male courtiers must balance competing demands, show martial prowess but not threaten the monarch, display learning but not seem presumptuous, dress splendidly but not outshine superiors, pursue love but not the wrong person. Robert Dudley, Elizabeth's favourite, navigates these contradictions for decades but never achieves his goal of marrying her. He remains forever almost consort, powerful but ultimately frustrated. Religious politics entangle everyone. Catholics face suspicion and persecution under Elizabeth. Protestant reformers who pushed too hard for further reformation also incur displeasure. The Elizabethan religious settlement satisfies almost no one but forces everyone to conform outwardly. Your true beliefs must remain hidden if they deviate from orthodoxy, creating paranoia about what others truly believe. The succession question haunts Elizabeth's reign. She refuses to marry or name an heir, keeping everyone uncertain and the realm technically unstable. Every potential heir attracts plotters. Mary Queen of Scots, imprisoned in England for 19 years, becomes the focus of multiple Catholic plots to assassinate Elizabeth and put Mary on the throne. Each plot discovered leads to arrests, torture, executions. Finally, in 1586, Walsingham's agents uncover the Babington plot, another scheme to kill Elizabeth and free Mary. The evidence, some of it forged or entrapped, implicates Mary directly. Elizabeth reluctantly signs her death warrant. In 1587, Mary is beheaded at Fotheringhay Castle. An anointed queen, executed by another anointed queen, unprecedented and shocking, even in an age of political violence. The Essex Rebellion of 1601 shows how quickly favour turns to treason. Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, Elizabeth's late-life favourite, grows frustrated with his declining influence. He attempts a coup, marching through London with armed followers, expecting popular support that never materialises. The rebellion collapses within hours. Essex is arrested, tried and executed. The queen he once charmed signs his death warrant without hesitation. You would find court life simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. The glamour, the power, the proximity to the throne, these would attract you. But the constant surveillance, the paranoia, the knowledge that a wrong word could mean execution, the expense you cannot afford, these would crush you. And if you're common-born, you'd never access court anyway. This world of intrigue and danger is reserved for nobles and their retainers. Even observing court politics from a distance, even living far from London, you'd feel the effects. Taxes increase to fund wars and royal extravagance. Religious policies change, requiring conformity. Laws are passed affecting daily life. The arbitrary power of nobles, reflecting the arbitrary power of the monarch, shapes local governance. The culture of fear and surveillance extends throughout the realm. As darkness falls and nobles retire from their courtly performances, as they remove elaborate costumes and face the reality that tomorrow's favour is never guaranteed, they understand that proximity to power means proximity to danger. The highest rises precede the hardest falls, and in Tudor England the fall from favour is often terminal. Better perhaps to live obscurely, safely away from the glittering, deadly world where ambition and terror dance together in the shadow of the throne. War, military service, and violence. The conscription officer arrives in the village with his list. Every able-bodied man between 16 and 60 is theoretically liable for military service. The officer selects, or rather, the local officials select for him, which men will be impressed into service. The criteria are not martial fitness, but social undesirability. The vagabonds, the troublemakers, the poor with no one to protect them, these are pressed into service. The prosperous, the well-connected, the necessary workers, these find exemptions. You would discover that military service in Tudor England is not honourable duty but punishment, that soldiers are not respected warriors but despised dregs of society, that war is not glory but disease, starvation and random death. The romantic image of Tudor warfare, knights in armour, noble combat, valorous deeds, exists for a tiny elite. For common soldiers, war is hell. The pressed men receive minimal training, perhaps a few days learning to hold a pike or fire an arquebus. Then they're marched to the coast for transport to wherever England is fighting, France, the Low Countries, Ireland. The march itself kills some, elderly men or sickly youth pressed into service despite obvious unfitness for military life. Those who survive the march face worse ahead. Transport is nightmare. Soldiers are packed into ships without adequate provisions, sanitation or shelter. Channel crossings in bad weather mean days of seasickness, of men vomiting on each other in crowded holds. Some ships sink, drowning hundreds. Others arrive with soldiers already sick from typhus spreading in the crowded, filthy conditions. Upon arrival in theatre, soldiers face immediate privation. Supply systems are chaotic and corrupt. Food shipments are inadequate, and what arrives is often rancid or stolen by officers who sell it for profit. Soldiers subsist on minimal rations of hardtack, rock-hard biscuits infested with weevils, and occasionally some cheese or salted meat. Malnutrition weakens everyone. Pay is irregular and insufficient. Soldiers are supposed to receive set wages, but payments are delayed for months or arrive short of promised amounts. Officers embezzle funds. Contractors defraud the military. Common soldiers go unpaid while suffering campaign hardships, creating desperation that leads to looting, desertion, and mutiny. Disease kills far more soldiers than combat. Typhus, dysentery, and plague ravage military camps where men live in close quarters with no sanitation. Latrines are inadequate or non-existent. Water sources are contaminated. Men sleep in wet clothes, developing pneumonia and fevers. Hospital care is minimal to non-existent. The sick are left to die or recover on their own. Combat, when it occurs, is chaotic and terrifying. Pike formations advance in massed ranks toward enemy formations, each side trying to maintain formation while pushing forward. The front ranks push pikes at each other, trying to break through. Men in rear ranks push those ahead forward. If formation breaks, it becomes slaughter as the organised side cuts down the disordered. Arquebuses and muskets, primitive firearms, are slow to load, inaccurate, and unreliable. The matchlock mechanism requires keeping a slow-burning match lit, difficult in wet weather. Loading involves measuring powder, pouring it down the barrel, adding the ball, wadding, and ramming, all while standing in formation under potential fire. The guns misfire frequently and explode occasionally, injuring the shooter. Artillery is more effective but still primitive. Cannons are heavy, immobile once placed, and require elaborate preparation to fire. They're effective against fortifications and massed troops but cannot be moved easily during battle. The noise and smoke create chaos. Being near a cannon when it fires risks deafness. Being near when one explodes means death or horrible injury. Sieges are the most common form of warfare and the most miserable for soldiers. Attackers dig trenches and build earthworks, living in mud for weeks or months, suffering from exposure, disease, and occasional sallies by defenders. Defenders huddle behind walls, rationing food, fearing starvation more than assault. Both sides suffer greatly. When walls are finally breached, the assault is butchery. Soldiers climb ladders or charge through breaches under fire. Those who reach the wall face defenders fighting desperately. The assault either succeeds quickly or fails with enormous casualties. If successful, the city is sacked. Soldiers loot, rape, and murder civilians in an organised orgy of violence that commanders allow as reward for their suffering. Naval warfare is even more deadly than land combat. Ships are cramped, disease-ridden floating prisons. Sailors and soldiers packed together spread typhus and other diseases efficiently. Food and water run short on long voyages. Scurvy kills men horribly, their teeth falling out, old wounds reopening, blood vessels bursting under skin. When ships engage, combat is nightmare. Cannons blast at close range, wooden splinters become deadly projectiles. Ships attempt to board each other, crew fighting hand-to-hand on slippery, bloody decks. Fire is constant danger. A single spark can doom a ship. Wounded men are thrown overboard or left to die below decks. The Spanish Armada of 1588, England's greatest military triumph, illustrates the realities. English ships harass the Spanish fleet as it moves up the channel. Fireships scatter the Armada at Calais. The Spanish flee into the North Sea, suffering storm damage, running short of supplies. Many ships wreck on the Irish coast. Thousands of Spanish soldiers and sailors drown or are killed by Irish locals. England celebrates victory, but most Spanish losses are from weather and privation, not combat. Irish campaigns are particularly brutal. English soldiers fight guerrilla warfare against Irish fighters who know the terrain and have local support. The English response is scorched earth, destroying crops, burning villages, killing livestock, deliberately creating famine. Thousands of Irish civilians die of starvation in the deliberate attempt to pacify the country through terror and deprivation. English soldiers in Ireland suffer immensely too. They sicken from unfamiliar diseases. They're ambushed in forests and bogs. They receive inadequate supplies and irregular pay. Many die not in combat but from disease and starvation. Those who survive return home traumatized, often disabled, always changed by the horror they witnessed and inflicted. Veterans receive minimal support. There's no Veterans Administration, no medical care, no pension system. Wounded veterans beg in streets, displaying injuries to evoke charity. Some parishes provide minimal poor relief. Many veterans become vagabonds, drifting from place to place, unable to work, living on charity or crime. Society that pressed them into service abandons them after. Officers live better, but face their own dangers. They purchase commissions, viewing military service as path to glory and advancement. Some achieve both. Many die inglorious deaths, from disease or minor wounds that become infected. Others survive but go bankrupt, expected to equip their troops from their own funds. They often impoverish themselves attempting to fulfill obligations. Desertion is common and harshly punished. Soldiers flee camps at night, attempting to make their way home or to neutral territory. Those caught are hanged or shot as examples. But the flow of deserters continues because conditions are intolerable. Many desert successfully, rejoining civilian society illegally, living as fugitives. Conscientious objection doesn't exist as a concept. You cannot refuse military service on moral grounds. Refusal means imprisonment or execution for cowardice. Religious pacifists face impossible choices. Some accept service and find non-combat roles. Others flee. A few accept execution rather than fight, becoming martyrs whose deaths change nothing. You would find Tudor military service horrific beyond imagining. Modern armies, however dangerous, provide training, equipment, medical care, regular pay, command structure, rules of engagement. Tudor armies provide none of this reliably. You're pressed into service unwillingly, inadequately trained, poorly equipped, irregularly paid, badly fed, exposed to disease and combat, then discarded if you survive. Even if you never serve yourself, war affects you. Taxes increase to fund campaigns. Trade disrupts when ships are commandeered for military transport. Villages lose working-age men to impressment. Disabled veterans return home, needing support the community struggles to provide. The cost of war, paid primarily by commoners who neither started it nor benefit from it, is staggering. As the soldier lies in a muddy ditch in Flanders, sick with dysentery, unpaid for 3 months, watching comrades die daily from disease, waiting for an assault that might come tomorrow or next week, he wonders how he arrived here. He was a farmer's son who spoke too freely in an alehouse, was noted by the constable as troublesome, and was selected for pressing when the conscription order came. Now he dies slowly of disease in a foreign land, in a war whose purpose he doesn't understand, for a queen he's never seen, representing a country that cares nothing for his survival. This is the reality of military service for common people in Tudor England. Not glory but misery, not honour but abandonment, not service but sacrifice demanded of those least able to bear it and least likely to be remembered. Economic precarity and the certainty of poverty. A labourer stands in the hiring market at dawn with dozens of others, hoping to be selected for a day's work. He's been waiting every morning this week. Yesterday no one hired him. The day before he worked but was paid less than promised. The farmer claimed the work was inadequate and docked his wages. Today he must find work because his family has no food and no money. His wife is pregnant. His 3-year-old daughter is sick. His luck is running out. You would discover that economic security in Tudor England is illusory, that poverty is not moral failing but structural inevitability, that the economy is designed to keep most people precarious and desperate. The modern assumption that hard work leads to prosperity, that poverty is avoidable through effort, that the economy rewards merit, none of this applies. Tudor economy is extractive, exploitative, and offers most people no path to escape poverty. Agricultural labour, the livelihood for most people, is seasonal and insecure. Harvest creates temporary abundance of work. Everyone is needed, wages rise slightly, but harvest lasts weeks, not months. The rest of the year, agricultural work is less available. In winter, there's almost no work. Labourers face months of or underemployment, surviving on savings from harvest work that were inadequate to begin with. Wages are controlled by law. The Statute of Artificers sets maximum wages that can be paid for various types of labour. The stated goal is preventing inflation and ensuring affordable labour for employers. The effect is keeping wages low regardless of worker productivity or living costs. Labourers cannot negotiate higher pay. Doing so breaks the law. Employers who pay above statutory limits are fined. Even when working full-time at legal wages, a labourer earns barely enough to survive. A common labourer earns about 6 pence per day. A loaf of bread costs 1 penny. His family of 4 needs perhaps 4 loaves daily. That's 4 pence just for bread, leaving 2 pence for everything else. Other food, firewood, rent, clothing, tools. It's not enough. The budget doesn't close. Poverty is mathematical certainty. Women's work pays even less. A woman performing the same labour as a man receives half or 2/3 the wages. The assumption is that women don't need full wages because they're supported by fathers or husbands. But many women are widows, or their husbands are unable to work, or they're unmarried. They struggle on wages insufficient for survival, supplementing income through spinning, taking in laundry, occasional prostitution, begging. Children must work as soon as they're capable, because family survival requires every member's contribution. A 7-year-old minding geese earns a penny a day. A 12-year-old working harvest earns adult wages. These children have no childhood, as moderns understand it. No play, no school, no protection from exploitation. They work, or the family starves. Rents consume large portions of income. A cottage rents for perhaps 40 shillings per year, 480 pence. That's 80 days of wages for a labourer earning 6 pence daily, 2.5 months of full-time work just for rent. But full-time work isn't available year-round. The labourer must earn rent money during high-wage harvest season and hope it lasts through winter when work is scarce. Debt is inescapable for most families. When income falls short, when illness prevents work, when unexpected expenses arise, and they always arise, families borrow. Interest rates are high, often usurious despite laws against excessive interest. Debt accumulates. Some debts can never be repaid. Debtors face imprisonment, which prevents them from working to repay, creating an impossible trap. Pawnshops do brisk business. Families pawn possessions, tools, clothing, cooking pots, when desperate for cash. They hope to redeem items later, but often cannot. The loss of tools means inability to work. The loss of warm clothing means suffering in winter. The loss of cooking pots means inability to prepare food properly. Poverty begets more poverty. The economy is zero-sum. Resources are fixed. Population growth means more people competing for the same amount of work, driving wages down. Agricultural improvements that increase productivity often mean fewer labourers needed, creating unemployment. Efficiency gains benefit landowners while harming workers who lose jobs. Enclosure, landlords fencing common lands for sheep pasture, destroys peasant livelihoods. Common lands where peasants grazed animals and gathered firewood are privatised. Tenant farmers are evicted, villages are destroyed, their populations dispersed. The wool produced on enclosed land enriches landlords. The displaced peasants become vagabonds, beggars, criminals. Price inflation throughout the Tudor period outpaces wage growth. Prices roughly triple during the 1500s while wages increase much less. The gap between income and expenses widens. Families that managed adequately in 1500 struggle in 1600 despite working equally hard. The economic ground shifts beneath them, making survival progressively harder. Guilds control urban trades, restricting who can practice crafts. To become a master craftsman requires years of apprenticeship, then journeyman work, then payment of significant fees and demonstration of skill. The system maintains quality but also restricts opportunity. Sons of masters have advantages. Outsiders struggle to enter trades. Many remain journeymen forever, never achieving master status that would allow independent work. Monopolies granted by the Crown restrict economic activity further. The right to trade in certain goods or to practice certain crafts is granted exclusively to favourites who pay for the privilege. Everyone else is excluded. The monopolies enrich courtiers and generate revenue for the Crown. They harm common people who face reduced competition and higher prices. Market regulations restrict free trade. Grain can be sold only in approved markets. Forestalling, buying grain before it reaches market, is illegal. Regrating, buying in one market to sell in another, is illegal. These regulations aim to ensure fair prices and prevent hoarding. They also prevent markets from functioning efficiently, creating rigidities that worsen shortages. Taxation falls heavily on the poor. Taxes are supposed to be levied according to wealth, but assessment is subjective and corrupt. The wealthy underreport assets and bribe assessors. The poor cannot hide their few possessions. Proportionally, the poor pay more. Special levies for wars, for ships, for the monarch's needs. These demands never cease. Poor relief is minimal and demeaning. The parish is responsible for its poor, collecting poor rates from property owners to support the destitute. But the amounts are inadequate. Recipients are divided into deserving poor, elderly, disabled, children, and undeserving poor, able-bodied, unemployed. The latter receive no assistance and are punished for vagrancy. Social mobility is nearly impossible. You're born into a rank and stay there. A labourer's son becomes a labourer. A servant's daughter becomes a servant. Occasional individuals rise through exceptional luck, ability or patronage. But these are rare exceptions that prove the rule. Most people live and die in the same poverty their parents endured. The psychological toll of economic precarity is crushing, never knowing if you'll find work tomorrow, never confident you can feed your family, never able to plan beyond immediate survival. This creates constant anxiety. The shame of poverty, the fear of destitution, the powerlessness before economic forces you cannot control, these grind people down. You, transported to Tudor England as a common person, would find the economic system designed for your exploitation. Your labour enriches others. Your suffering generates profit for landlords, masters, merchants, the crown. You work hard and remain poor. You follow rules that constrain you while the wealthy ignore rules that constrain them. The economy is not neutral mechanism but apparatus of control and extraction. Even if you're fortunate, healthy, skilled, employed, you're always one accident, one illness, one bad harvest away from destitution. Economic security doesn't exist. The safety nets you take for granted, unemployment insurance, disability support, minimum wage laws, workers' rights, none exist. You're alone in an economy actively hostile to your survival. As the labourer stands at the hiring market, as dawn breaks and no employer selects him, as he realises he'll go another day without work or wages, he feels the familiar despair. He's worked hard his entire life. He's never stolen, never shirked, yet he cannot feed his family. His daughter needs medicine he cannot afford. His pregnant wife needs nutrition she won't receive. Hard work, virtue, devotion. None of these protect against an economic system designed to keep him poor. This is the economic reality of Tudor England for most people. Not opportunity, but exploitation. Not prosperity, but precarity. Not meritocracy, but a structural poverty that hard work cannot overcome. The final years, Elizabeth's decline and the century's end. The year is 1601, and Queen Elizabeth, now 68 years old, sits for the last time before Parliament. The woman who once dazzled courts across Europe with her beauty and wit, who danced through nights and rode horses for hours, who commanded England with intelligence and political genius for over 40 years, is visibly failing. Her face is heavily painted with white lead and vinegar, toxic cosmetics that destroy her skin even as they hide its decay. Her red wig covers hair lost to age, and those same cosmetics. Her teeth are black and rotting, causing constant pain she bears stoically. You would witness the end of an era and feel the anxiety of succession uncertainty. Elizabeth has refused to name an heir for her entire reign, keeping everyone in suspense, using the succession as political leverage. Now, as her death approaches, the question becomes urgent and dangerous. Who will rule England after her? The wrong succession could mean civil war, foreign invasion, religious persecution reversed, chaos. The ageing Queen's court is a strange place, mixing the vital and the moribund. Young courtiers like Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, bring energy and ambition. But Essex's rebellion in 1601, his attempt to seize power from an ageing queen he felt had spurned him, ends with his execution. Elizabeth signs his death warrant, then mourns privately. The woman who once had favourites now watches them die or abandon her. The economy struggles under the weight of prolonged war with Spain and continued campaigns in Ireland. Taxes are crushing. Monopolies granted to favourites create resentment. Basic goods cost more because courtiers control their trade and extract profits. The Parliament of 1601 debates monopolies, and Elizabeth must address their complaints in what becomes her golden speech, promising reform while defending her prerogative. The speech reveals her still formidable political skills. She acknowledges mistakes, promises to remedy abuses, expresses love for her people, and reaffirms her authority. The Parliament is mollified. But the underlying problems remain. England is overstretched militarily, economically strained, politically uncertain about the future. The Elizabethan Golden Age, if it ever truly existed for common people, is tarnished by decade's end. The succession question haunts everything. Elizabeth refuses to name James VI of Scotland, son of Mary Queen of Scots whom Elizabeth executed, as her heir, though he's the obvious choice. To name him would make her a lame duck, would create a rival centre of power, would acknowledge her mortality. So she remains silent, and everyone waits, plans, hopes, and fears. The common people feel the century's end approach with mixed emotions. The 1590s have been brutal. Harvest failures, famines, plague, war, economic hardship. Elizabeth, who reigned for over 40 years, is the only monarch most living people remember. Her death will bring change, and change is frightening. Will the next monarch be Catholic, reversing the Protestant settlement? Will there be civil war over succession? Will foreign powers invade? No one knows. Ireland remains a bleeding wound. The 9 Years' War, 1593-1603, sees Hugh O'Neill lead a sophisticated resistance against English conquest. English forces struggle against Irish guerrilla tactics. The English response is increasingly brutal. Scorched earth campaigns, deliberate starvation, mass killings. Both sides commit atrocities. English soldiers die by thousands from disease and ambush. The Irish population suffers catastrophically. Finally, in 1603, Elizabeth falls seriously ill. She refuses to go to bed. Legend says she feared that lying down meant death. She stands or sits on cushions for days, growing weaker, barely eating, barely speaking. Her courtiers hover, preparing for the transition of power. On March 24, 1603, she dies at Richmond Palace, ending the Tudor dynasty. The succession proceeds smoothly, surprisingly. Robert Cecil, Elizabeth's chief minister, has been secretly corresponding with James of Scotland, preparing the transition. Within hours of Elizabeth's death, messengers ride north to inform James he is now James I of England. He travels south, is proclaimed king, and enters London peacefully. The feared succession crisis doesn't materialise. England passes from the Tudors to the Stuarts without civil war. But the relief is temporary. James brings his own problems: favouritism, extravagance, conflicts with Parliament, religious policies that alienate both Catholics and Puritans. The 17th century will bring civil war, regicide, republic, restoration, upheavals that make the Tudor era seem stable in retrospect. But that's another story. For common people living through Elizabeth's final years, life remains as hard as ever. The Queen's death doesn't change their daily struggles. They still work back-breaking labour, still fear disease and hunger, still live precarious lives where poverty and death are constant companions. The grand events at court, the succession drama, the political manoeuvring, these affect them only marginally. Their concerns are immediate and local, finding work, feeding families, surviving another day. Yet Elizabeth's death marks a genuine historical boundary. The Tudor century, from Henry VII's victory at Bosworth in 1485 to Elizabeth's death in 1603, transformed England from medieval kingdom to early modern state. The religious reformation, the cultural flowering, the economic changes, the expansion of royal power, the beginnings of global empire, all happened during Tudor rule. For better and worse, the Tudors made modern England. You, experiencing these final Tudor years, would feel the weight of accumulated trauma. A century of religious persecution, of political terror, of economic exploitation, of war and disease and famine. The survivors of all this carry scars. They've learned to keep their heads down, to conform outwardly, to trust no one completely, to expect little and appreciate survival. These lessons pass to their children, shaping English character for generations. The optimism of Henry VIII's early reign, the young, vigorous king, the Renaissance learning, the promise of reform, has curdled into the paranoia and exhaustion of Elizabeth's final years. The century began with hope and ends with relief that it's over. The Tudors brought glory, but at terrible human cost. The magnificence was real, but so was the suffering. Both truths must be acknowledged. As Elizabeth's body lies in state, as elaborate funeral preparations proceed, as James journeys south to claim his new kingdom, the the common people continue their lives. They plough fields, tend animals, cook meals, raise children, endure. The century ends, a new one begins, but for them, little changes. The struggle continues, survival remains the goal, and life in England, while it will evolve, will remain dangerous, difficult, and often deadly for the majority for centuries to come. Medicine, quackery, and desperate remedies. The physician examines his patient's urine, holding the flask up to candlelight, studying its colour, cloudiness, and sediment. This uroscopy, he believes, reveals the patient's internal state, the balance of humours, the nature of disease, the prognosis. In reality, it reveals almost nothing, but it's one of the few diagnostic tools available. The patient, suffering from what we would recognise as appendicitis, will die within days despite, or because of, the physician's interventions. You would be horrified by Tudor medicine, a grotesque mixture of ancient theory, folk practice, religious belief, and pure guesswork. The Hippocratic Galenic system, 1500 years old and fundamentally wrong, dominates learned medicine. The body contains 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, that must remain in balance. Disease results from humoral imbalance. Treatment aims to restore balance through bloodletting, purging, inducing vomiting, or applying hot, cold, and wet to dry remedies. This theory is entirely incorrect, but it provides a coherent framework that explains everything, which makes it resistant to disproof. Any treatment failure can be explained within the system: wrong dosage, wrong timing, patient's constitution too damaged, astrological factors unfavourable. The theory can never be wrong, only the application. Physicians are rare and expensive, trained at universities like Oxford, Cambridge, or Padua. They study ancient texts, learn Latin medical terminology, and practice diagnosis through observation and logical deduction based on humoral theory. They don't touch patients much. Manual examination is beneath their dignity. They prescribe treatments, but don't administer them. They're consultants, not healers. Most people never see a physician. They rely on folk healers, wise women, herbalists, and cunning folk who treat illnesses with plant remedies, charms, prayers, and practical interventions passed down through generations. Some of these treatments work. Willow bark contains salicylic acid, related to aspirin. Honey has antibacterial properties. Certain herbs do have medicinal effects. Others are pure placebo or actively harmful. Bloodletting is nearly universal for treating illness. Based on humoral theory, removing blood supposedly reduces excess blood humour or draws bad humours from the body. Physicians make incisions in veins, collecting blood in bowls. Barber surgeons apply leeches. The amount of blood removed can be substantial, pints. Patients already weakened by disease are further weakened by blood loss, which often proves fatal. Purging, inducing diarrhea or vomiting, is another standard treatment. Patients are given emetics that cause violent vomiting or purgatives that cause explosive diarrhea. The theory is that bad humours are expelled. The reality is dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, and further weakening. Combined with bloodletting, purging often kills patients who might have survived if left alone. Medications are complex mixtures of ingredients based more on symbolic thinking than pharmacology. Theriac, a cure-all medication, contains dozens of ingredients including viper flesh, opium, wine, honey, and various herbs. It's expensive and prestigious. It's also useless for most purposes, though the opium provides pain relief. The elaborate preparation and exotic ingredients suggest potency that doesn't exist. Astrological medicine is taken seriously. Physicians consult astrological charts to determine favourable times for treatments. The position of planets supposedly influences which organs are affected and which remedies will work. Bloodletting is recommended when the moon is in certain signs. Surgery must avoid days when planets unfavourably aspect relevant body parts. This adds another layer of complexity while adding no therapeutic value. Surgeons, lower in status than physicians, perform amputations, set bones, treat wounds, and remove bladder stones. Surgery without anaesthesia beyond alcohol and opium is agonising. Patients are held down by strong assistants while surgeons work quickly. Speed is essential. The faster the surgery, the less time for the patient to die from shock or blood loss. Post-surgical infection kills most surgery patients. The connection between cleanliness and infection isn't understood. Surgical instruments are rarely cleaned. Surgeons wear street clothes stiffened with the blood and pus of previous patients. Wounds are probed with dirty hands. Infection is almost inevitable. When wounds suppurate, produce pus, it's considered a good sign, part of healing, not recognised as infection. Amputation is relatively common for severely injured limbs. The surgeon cuts through tissue and bone, cauterizes with a hot iron to stop bleeding, then bandages the stump. Most amputees die from blood loss, shock, or subsequent infection. Those who survive face life as cripples, unable to work, dependent on charity, often reduced to begging. Dental care is primitive and brutal. Toothaches are treated by barber surgeons who extract teeth with pliers or keys, metal instruments that grip teeth and wrench them out. No anesthesia. The procedure is agonizing. Infections sometimes develop in the socket, occasionally proving fatal. Many people endure toothaches rather than face extraction. Women's medicine is particularly deficient. Gynecological conditions are poorly understood. Childbirth complications often prove fatal because surgical interventions that could save lives, caesarean sections, would certainly kill the mother. Midwives do their best with limited knowledge and tools. When labour goes wrong, prayers are more effective than medical intervention because medical intervention is usually harmful. Mental illness is not distinguished from demonic possession or moral failing. The violently insane are confined, chained, sometimes beaten to drive out devils. Milder mental illness is misunderstood and untreated. Depression is considered spiritual weakness. Anxiety is moral failure. The concept of mental illness as medical condition treatable with compassion and therapy doesn't exist. Quack remedies proliferate. Travelling salesmen sell miracle cures, potions that cure everything, amulets that ward off plague, prayers written on paper to be swallowed for health. The desperate buy these remedies, hoping for relief from suffering that legitimate medicine cannot address. Some quacks are cynical fraudsters, others genuinely believe in their remedies. All profit from suffering and provide no real benefit. Plague remedies are especially varied and useless. Vinegar-soaked sponges held to the nose supposedly filter bad air. Pomanders, balls of aromatic spices, worn around the neck supposedly ward off infection. Amulets inscribed with prayers offer protection. Theriac, applied to buboes or taken internally, is prescribed despite being ineffective. Nothing works because the actual cause, bacteria spread by fleas, isn't understood. Syphilis treatment with mercury is nearly as bad as the disease. Mercury is rubbed into sores, inhaled as vapour, or taken internally. It causes mercury poisoning, hair loss, tooth loss, tremors, kidney damage, brain damage. A Night with Venus, A Lifetime with Mercury, warns of both the disease and its treatment. Many patients die from mercury poisoning before syphilis kills them. Hospitals exist primarily for the poor. St Bartholomew's and St Thomas's in London provide minimal care for those who cannot afford physicians. Conditions are crowded and unsanitary. Different diseases mix together. Surgical patients, infectious disease patients, chronic illness patients all share wards. Cross-infection is common. Many enter hospitals and never leave, dying from their original conditions or from infections acquired there. Pharmacies, apothecary shops, compound medications prescribed by physicians or sold directly to customers. Quality control is minimal. Ingredients might be adulterated, substituted, or misidentified. Dosages are approximate. Some apothecaries are knowledgeable and honest. Others are incompetent or fraudulent. As a patient, you have no way to know which you're dealing with. The germ theory of disease, that microorganisms cause infections, won't be discovered for 3 more centuries. The miasma theory, that bad air causes disease, dominates medical thinking. This leads to some beneficial practices like avoiding swamps and improving ventilation, but it completely misses the actual disease vectors and transmission methods. Hand washing, sterilization, quarantine of infectious patients. These interventions that would actually prevent disease are not understood or practiced systematically. You would be terrified of falling ill in Tudor England because there's no effective help. Modern people take for granted that illness means diagnosis and treatment, that most conditions can be cured or managed, that medical professionals have expertise that helps. Tudor medicine offers none of this. Physicians might make you worse, folk healers might help or harm unpredictably. Mostly, you recover or die based on your constitution and luck, not because of medical intervention. Even minor injuries and illnesses that modern medicine treats easily can prove fatal without antibiotics, without antiseptics, without effective medical care. A cut that becomes infected and causes sepsis. A broken bone that's set poorly and becomes infected. A respiratory infection that progresses to pneumonia. Appendicitis that ruptures, causing peritonitis. Any of dozens of conditions that are medical emergencies but treatable today are death sentences in Tudor England. The psychological burden of medical helplessness is crushing. Watching loved ones suffer without being able to help them meaningfully, knowing that if you fall ill you'll likely die no matter what is done, fearing that medical treatment might kill you faster than disease. This creates anxiety that moderns, protected by effective medicine, cannot fully appreciate. As the physician departs, leaving behind prescriptions for bloodletting, purging and theriac, as the patient weakens from appendicitis that will rupture and kill him. Despite or because of these treatments, we see the tragic reality. Tudor medicine, with rare exceptions, cannot cure. It can sometimes ease symptoms. Opium relieves pain, though nothing addresses causes. Mostly it provides the illusion of doing something, offers hope where none exists, and occasionally hastens death through interventions more harmful than disease. This is the state of healing in Tudor England: minimal knowledge, maximum confidence, and tragic results. Death, burial, and what comes after. The church bell tolls slowly, the death knell announcing another passing in the village. The pattern of rings indicates the deceased's age and sex: 3 sets of 3 for a man, 3 sets of 2 for a woman, then 1 ring for each year of life. The villagers count 28 tolls. A young man then, dead in his prime. Disease, accident, violence, it could be anything. Death is so common that the cause matters less than the simple fact. Another life ended, another funeral to attend, another reminder of mortality's nearness. You would find Tudor attitudes toward death simultaneously alien and comprehensible. Alien because death is so much more present, so much more accepted than in modern life. Comprehensible because grief and loss are universal human experiences that transcend centuries. But the rituals, beliefs, and practical realities of death in Tudor England would shock and disturb you. Death comes with little warning and less dignity. The sick person, if conscious, calls for a priest to hear final confession and administer last rites. This is crucial. Dying without confession and communion risks hell. Neighbours gather around the deathbed, praying, witnessing. The dying person might make a final statement asking forgiveness, giving deathbed instructions that carry moral weight. Then death comes, often unpleasantly, gasping for breath, convulsing, bleeding, soiling oneself. There is no peaceful passing, no medical management of symptoms, just the raw reality of the body shutting down. The body's washed and wrapped in a shroud, a sheet of linen or wool. The wealthy might have elaborate shrouds. The poor are wrapped in whatever fabric the family can spare. The body's placed on a board in the main room of the house while family prepares for burial. In warm weather, decomposition begins quickly. The smell is terrible, but the body must be watched. Corpse watchers sit with it day and night until burial, praying, ensuring that rats don't disturb it. Burial happens quickly, usually within 2 days. There's no embalming except for royalty and the highest nobility. The body is taken to church on a bier, a simple platform carried by neighbours. The coffin, if there is one, is plain wood. The poor are often buried directly in shrouds without coffins. The funeral service is brief. Protestant funerals under Elizabeth reject the elaborate Catholic rituals of prayers for the dead, focusing instead on brief committal. The graveyard surrounds the church, crowded with generations of burials. There are no permanent markers for common people, perhaps a wooden cross or simple stone that weathers away within decades. Graves are reused after bodies have decomposed. Gravediggers work in soil thick with human remains, occasionally uncovering bones from previous burials that are collected and stored in charnel houses, rooms or crypts filled with disarticulated human bones. The wealthy buy space inside the church for burial, beneath the floor or in wall tombs. Elaborate monuments with effigies of the deceased in stone or brass proclaim their status for posterity. These monuments are status symbols as much as memorials, displaying wealth and connections even in death. Some include detailed inscriptions recounting the deceased's virtues, offices and lineage. Mourning customs are elaborate and expensive. Widows wear black for a year or more. Black cloth is expensive, creating financial hardship for poor widows. Funeral feasts providing food and drink for attendees can bankrupt poor families. The community expects these observances. Failing to properly mourn and bury the dead invites social censure and suggests the deceased was unloved or the family is impious. Wills are important documents, written well before death by anyone with property to leave. The will begins with religious preamble, commending the soul to God, affirming faith, requesting prayers, if Catholic, or expressing confidence in salvation, if Protestant. Then it disposes of property, specifying who receives what. Executors are named to carry out instructions. Dying without a will creates legal complications and family disputes. Children's deaths, so common, receive less elaborate treatment. Infants might be buried in simple ceremonies with minimal mourning, the assumption being that the child's soul goes immediately to heaven and prolonged grief is inappropriate. Some parishes have sections of graveyards specifically for infants and young children, where tiny graves cluster together, silent testament to the brutal mortality rates. Suicide is considered mortal sin and crime. Suicides cannot be buried in consecrated ground. They're buried at crossroads with stakes through their hearts. Folklore holds this prevents their ghosts from walking. Their property is forfeit to the crown. Families of suicides face social stigma. These harsh policies sometimes lead to covering up suicides, claiming death was accidental to allow proper burial. Murder victims are buried normally, but their deaths require investigation. The coroner examines the body, holds an inquest, determines cause of death. If murder is proven, the hunt for the killer begins. Until caught, the killer's property is seized. The victim's family can pursue blood money or revenge. Murder disrupts community peace and demands justice that isn't always achieved. Plague deaths during epidemics overwhelm normal burial practices. Bodies are collected at night and buried in mass graves outside city walls. Quicklime is spread over corpses to speed decomposition and reduce smell. The graves fill rapidly during major outbreaks. Thousands are buried with no individual ceremonies, no markers, no remembrance beyond parish registers recording died of plague. Ghosts and the supernatural are real to Tudor people. The dead don't always rest quietly. Ghosts return to haunt the living, particularly if they died violently, without proper burial, or with unfinished business. Stories of ghostly encounters are common. Some are genuinely believed, others are elaborated for entertainment. But the boundary between the living and dead seems permeable, with the dead sometimes returning to visit or torment the living. The Protestant Reformation changed death rituals significantly. Catholic practices, prayers for the dead, masses for souls in purgatory, elaborate funeral rites, were abolished. Protestants rejected purgatory, believing the dead go immediately to heaven or hell based on faith. Prayers for the dead are useless because the soul's destination is already fixed. This simplification reduced costs but removed comforting rituals that helped the living process grief. Yet some Catholic practices persisted secretly. Recusant Catholic families might arrange for illegal masses to be said for their dead. Prayers for departed souls continued privately. The old beliefs, that the living could help the dead through prayer, that souls lingered in purgatory needing assistance, died hard. Many people hedged their bets, conforming to Protestant norms publicly, while maintaining Catholic practices privately. Memento mori, remember you must die, was constant theme in Tudor culture. Skulls appear in artwork, jewellery, decorative objects. Literature emphasises life's brevity and death's certainty. Sermons dwell on mortality and judgment. This wasn't morbidity, but realism. Keeping death in mind encouraged pious living and diminished attachment to worldly things. You would find the omnipresence of death psychologically overwhelming. Modern people encounter death occasionally, at a distance, managed by professionals. Tudor people encountered it constantly. Family members, neighbours, friends dying regularly. The high child mortality alone meant most parents buried multiple children. The psychological burden of repeated grief, of never being far from loss, of knowing your own death could come at any moment, this would test your sanity. Yet Tudor people developed coping mechanisms. Religious faith provided framework for understanding death, not as random tragedy but as God's will, as transition to afterlife. Community rituals channeled grief into structured mourning. the acceptance that death comes for everyone, eventually provided a fatalistic peace. What could not be prevented could at least be accepted. The dying person's perspective would differ radically from modern experience. No morphine eases pain. No medical technology prolongs life. No illusions about recovery. When death approaches, you know it. You prepare, confess sins, forgive enemies, give final instructions, make peace with God and man. Then you die, surrounded by family and community, your passing witnessed and acknowledged, your soul commended to God's mercy. As another body is lowered into the crowded churchyard, as the priest intones the committal, as the mourners throw handfuls of earth onto the shrouded corpse, as the gravedigger begins filling the hole, the living turn back to their own lives. They've done their duty by the dead. Now they must attend to survival. Tomorrow they'll return to work, to routine, to the business of living until their own time comes, and it will come, probably sooner than they expect. The average life expectancy hovers around 35 to 40 years, not because everyone dies at 40, but because so many die young that the average is pulled down. Survive childhood, and you might reach 60 or 70, but many don't survive childhood. Death is not the end of a long life, but a constant companion throughout life, claiming people of all ages, never far away, always expected. This is the final truth about Tudor England. You cannot escape death, cannot delay it effectively, cannot avoid confronting it. Modern medicine has given us the illusion that death is optional, that it comes only in old age, that it can be postponed indefinitely. Tudor people had no such illusions. They knew death intimately, accepted it as inevitable, and structured their lives around the certainty that they would die. Maybe tomorrow, maybe today, probably before they're old. This knowledge shaped everything: their faith, their values, their priorities, their understanding of what matters, and it would fundamentally change you if you lived among them, stripping away modern illusions and forcing you to confront the mortality you spend most of your life pretending doesn't apply to you. The weight of history and the gift of modernity. We have walked through Tudor England for the length of its existence, from Henry VII's victory at Bosworth Field in 1485 to Elizabeth III's death in 1603. We have visited villages and cities, cottages and courts. We have witnessed disease, hunger, violence, exploitation, suffering and death. We have examined the structures, social, economic, political, religious, that shaped lives and determined fates. And now, returning to our own time, we must reckon with what we've learned. The verdict is clear: you would not survive life in Tudor England, not because you're weak or foolish, but because survival there required adaptations you don't possess, immunities your body lacks, acceptance of conditions your mind would reject, and resignation to powerlessness that contradicts your fundamental assumptions about human life. The physical impossibility: your body would betray you first and most obviously. The disease environment alone would likely kill you within a year. Your immune system, despite being generally healthy, has been trained to fight 21st century pathogens, not 16th century ones. You've been vaccinated against diseases that ravaged Tudor England. You've never been exposed to the disease burden that Tudor children either survived or died from, building immunity through that brutal lottery. Measles, which you might have been vaccinated against, would strike you as an adult when it's more dangerous. Typhus, typhoid, dysentery, plague, diseases you've never encountered, would find your immune system unprepared. Parasitic worms would colonize your intestines, competing for nutrients. Lice and fleas would infest your body, spreading diseases with each bite. The cumulative assault would overwhelm you. Even if you somehow survived the disease burden, the physical demands would break you. The manual labour, 10 to 12 hours daily of back-breaking work, would injure you. Your muscles, even if you exercise regularly, aren't conditioned for sustained agricultural toil. You'd pull muscles, strain joints, injure your back. Without rest, without proper medical care, these injuries would not heal properly. You'd become chronically injured, in constant pain, unable to work effectively, beginning the spiral into poverty and death. The malnutrition would weaken you further. The Tudor diet, monotonous and nutritionally inadequate, cannot sustain health as you understand it. You'd lose weight, your energy would flag, your mental acuity would diminish. Combined with overwork and disease, malnutrition would leave you vulnerable to every threat. The psychological impossibility. Perhaps even more than physical challenges, the psychological burden would defeat you. You are psychologically unprepared for Tudor life in ways you cannot fully appreciate until confronted with them. The complete lack of privacy would drive you to desperation. You've never lived without the ability to be alone, to have space that's yours, to close a door and know no one can enter. Tudor life offers no privacy. You're always surrounded, always watched, always subject to community scrutiny. Your modern need for solitude, for private time to process thoughts and emotions, cannot be met. The powerlessness would crush your spirit. You believe, whether consciously or not, that you have some control over your life, that your choices matter, that effort can improve your circumstances. Tudor commoners had almost no control. Their labour was claimed by superiors. Their time was not their own. Their circumstances would not improve no matter how hard they worked. Accepting this helplessness requires a mindset that modern culture has not prepared you for. The omnipresence of death would traumatize you permanently. Watching half your children die, seeing neighbours die of plague, witnessing public executions, living with the knowledge that you could die tomorrow from an infected cut. The psychological toll would be immense. Modern people are shielded from death. Tudor people could not be. You would struggle to function under the weight of mortality's constant presence. The religious conformity would suffocate you. Modern people, even religious ones, live in pluralistic societies that permit, or at least tolerate, diverse beliefs. Tudor England demanded absolute conformity to official doctrine, enforced by surveillance and violence. Your modern habits of questioning, of seeking evidence, of tolerating diverse viewpoints, these would mark you as dangerous. You'd be forced to hide your true thoughts constantly, never expressing honest doubts or alternative views. The psychological strain would be severe, the social impossibility. The social structures of Tudor England would trap and constrain you intolerably. You assume society exists to serve individuals, that institutions should promote human flourishing, that authorities should be accountable. Tudor England inverted these assumptions. The rigid class hierarchy would confine you. Born into poverty, you stay poor. Born common, you remain common. Upward mobility is nearly impossible. Your modern belief in meritocracy, in the possibility of advancement through effort, would be disproven daily. You'd watch mediocrities prosper through birth while talented commoners remain poor. The injustice would enrage you, but expressing that rage would be dangerous. If you're female, the gender hierarchy would crush you utterly. Modern women have legal rights, bodily autonomy, the ability to make life choices. Tudor married women were property. Their bodies were not their own. Their choices were made by men. The complete subjugation would be intolerable to anyone raised with modern assumptions about gender equality. The community surveillance would turn neighbours into threats. Tudor villages enforced conformity through gossip, social pressure, and reporting to authorities. You could trust no one completely. Privacy was impossible. Nonconformity invited punishment. Your every word and action were monitored, judged, potentially reported. The paranoia this creates would be psychologically crippling, the existential impossibility. At the deepest level, Tudor life would challenge your fundamental assumptions about existence, meaning and purpose. Modern people believe life should be pleasant, that suffering should be minimized, that happiness is a reasonable goal. Tudor people believed life was a vale of tears, that suffering was humanity's lot, that earthly happiness was fleeting vanity. Modern people value individual fulfillment, self-expression, personal growth. Tudor people valued duty, obedience, knowing one's place. Modern people believe they're authors of their own lives. Tudor people believed their lives were written by God, by fate, by forces beyond their control. These different worldviews create different realities. A Tudor person found meaning in suffering, acceptance in subordination, peace in submission to God's will. You, with modern assumptions, would find only meaningless suffering, unjust hierarchy, and stolen autonomy. The psychological frameworks that allowed Tudor people to endure don't exist for you. What we learn. This journey through Tudor England teaches several crucial lessons. First, that comfort and security are recent, fragile, and reversible. The conditions that would kill you in Tudor England prevailed for most of human history and still exist in parts of the world today. What you take for granted, clean water, adequate food, effective medicine, physical safety, legal rights, are achievements of specific historical circumstances that could be lost. Second, that privilege is invisible until confronted with its absence. Modern people live with privileges we barely recognise. The privilege of expecting to survive childhood, of clean water from taps, of food security, of medical care, of education, of legal personhood. Tudor commoners had none of these. Recognising our privilege should inspire both gratitude and determination to extend these benefits to everyone. Third, that human beings are remarkably resilient and adaptable. Tudor people endured conditions we find unimaginable, and still found meaning, joy, love, beauty. They were not broken by hardship, but adapted to it. They built families, created art, maintained communities, practiced faith. Their resilience commands respect even as we acknowledge their suffering. Fourth, that progress is real but uneven. In many ways, medicine, technology, human rights, standard of living, we've progressed enormously since Tudor times. But in other ways, inequality, exploitation, environmental destruction, we've created new problems. Progress is not automatic or guaranteed. Each generation must actively work to maintain gains and extend benefits. The final verdict. So why wouldn't you survive life in Tudor England? Because you are a creature of your time, shaped by modernity in ways that make you unsuited for the past. Your body lacks the immunities, your mind lacks the frameworks, your spirit lacks the resignation. You're adapted for 21st century life, not 16th century existence. But this is not weakness, it's specialization. You're no less resilient than Tudor people. You're resilient in different ways, adapted to different challenges. They would struggle equally in our time. The pace, the technology, the social complexity, the psychological demands of modern life would overwhelm them. The lesson is not that modern people are inferior, but that every age creates humans adapted to its specific conditions. We cannot return to the past any more than we can become different species. We are what history has made us, for better and worse. Gratitude and responsibility. As we close this chronicle and return fully to our own time, we should feel profound gratitude for the accident of being born when and where we were. If you're reading this, you almost certainly enjoy advantages that Tudor people could not imagine. Healthcare that keeps you alive, food security that prevents starvation, clean water that prevents disease, education that opens opportunities, legal rights that protect you from arbitrary power. But gratitude should inspire responsibility. Billions of people today still live in conditions Tudor people would recognise, without clean water, adequate food, medical care, education or legal protection. The progress we celebrate has not reached everyone. The comfort we enjoy is built partly on systems that exploit others. Our privilege creates obligation. We cannot change the past. We cannot save the millions who died in Tudor England from disease, hunger, violence and despair. But we can learn from their suffering. We can recognise that the conditions that killed them were not inevitable but resulted from specific social, economic and political structures. And we can work to ensure that no one today must endure what they endured. The persistent relevance. You might ask, why study Tudor England if it's so different from our world? Why immerse ourselves in suffering that's past and cannot be changed? The answer is that understanding the past illuminates the present and shapes the future. First, it provides perspective. When you understand how recently most people lived in conditions of desperate poverty, constant disease and political oppression, you appreciate how remarkable modern progress has been. This doesn't mean accepting current injustices. We should always work for improvement, but it does mean recognising genuine achievements worth preserving. Second, it reveals the contingency of progress. The improvements we enjoy are not natural or inevitable, but resulted from specific developments. Germ theory and modern medicine, agricultural innovations that increased food production, political movements that established rights and protections, economic changes that created broader prosperity. These developments could have happened differently or not at all. Understanding this contingency should make us vigilant about protecting and extending progress. Third, it humanises history. Tudor people were not statistics or abstractions, but individuals with hopes, fears, loves, and dreams. They suffered in ways that deserve remembrance and respect. By understanding their lives, we honour their humanity and recognise our connection to them across centuries. They are our ancestors, literally or figuratively, and their struggles made our world possible. Fourth, it challenges our assumptions. Modern people tend toward presentism, judging the past by present standards, assuming our values are universal and timeless. Studying Tudor England reveals how much of what we consider natural is actually cultural and historical. This should inspire humility about our own certainties and openness to the possibility that future generations might view our practices with the same horror we feel toward Tudor cruelties. What Tudor England teaches about human nature. Perhaps most importantly, studying this brutal age reveals fundamental truths about human nature, our capacity for both cruelty and compassion, our resilience and fragility, our ability to find meaning amid suffering and to inflict suffering in pursuit of meaning. Tudor England shows humans at our worst: the casual brutality, the religious persecution, the exploitation of the weak, the acceptance of suffering as natural. But it also shows humans at our best: the courage to endure impossible conditions, the love that persists despite loss, the creativity that produces beauty amid ugliness, the faith that provides hope when circumstances offer none. The same species that burned heretics alive also created Shakespeare's plays. The same culture that accepted child labour also produced families that loved their children deeply. The same society that tolerated starvation also developed networks of mutual aid and charity. Human nature contains multitudes, and every age brings forth both the best and worst of what we are. This should inspire neither naive optimism nor cynical pessimism, but realistic understanding. Humans are capable of tremendous evil and tremendous good, often simultaneously. Progress is possible but not guaranteed. Cruelty can be reduced but not eliminated. The work of building a better world is never finished because each generation must choose anew what kind of society to create. The moral lessons. What moral lessons should we take from this journey through Tudor England? First, that suffering matters regardless of when it occurs. The pain of a Tudor child dying of dysentery is not less real because it happened 5 centuries ago. The grief of a Tudor mother burying her baby is not less valid because she lived in a different time. Suffering is suffering, and human pain deserves acknowledgement and respect across all eras. Second, that social structures can multiply or reduce suffering. Tudor England structures, economic exploitation, rigid hierarchy, religious persecution, inadequate public health, created preventable suffering. Better structures could have reduced that suffering substantially. This remains true today. Our structures create or prevent suffering. We bear responsibility for the systems we maintain. Third, that individuals matter but structures matter more. A kind lord might treat his tenants well, but the feudal system still exploited them. A merciful judge might show leniency, but the legal system still favoured the powerful. Individual virtue is important, but systemic justice is essential. We must work to create structures that produce good outcomes regardless of individual virtue. Fourth, that knowledge without application is useless, but application without knowledge is dangerous. Tudor England had some medical knowledge but couldn't apply it effectively due to lack of technology and understanding. It applied other knowledge, humoral theory, miasma theory, that was fundamentally wrong, often making things worse. We need both correct knowledge and the wisdom to apply it appropriately. Fifth, that change is possible but difficult. Tudor England transformed dramatically over its 118 years. Religious transformation, political centralisation, economic changes, cultural flowering, all occurred despite enormous resistance. Change is possible even in seemingly rigid societies, but it requires sustained effort, often across generations, and usually involves conflict and cost. The gift of modernity. As we conclude this chronicle, as we close the door on Tudor England and return fully to our own time, we should feel overwhelming gratitude for modernity's gifts. We live in an age where most children survive infancy, where clean water flows from taps, where food is abundant and varied, where medicine can cure or manage most diseases, where pain can be relieved, where most people can expect to live to 70 or 80, where education is available, where legal rights protect individuals, where opportunity exists for advancement, where speech is mostly free, where belief is mostly private, where women have legal personhood, where democracy provides some popular control over government. None of these things existed in Tudor England. All of them were built through the struggles of millions of people across centuries, scientists discovering truth, activists fighting injustice, reformers changing systems, ordinary people demanding better. We are beneficiaries of their work. This inheritance creates obligation. We must preserve what's been built. We must extend benefits to everyone. We must continue the work of improvement. We must leave our descendants a world better than we received. The final word. As night falls and we close this chronicle, as the voices of Tudor England fade and we return to our comfortable present, let us remember what we've learned. We've learned that life for most people through most of history was brutally hard in ways modern people cannot fully appreciate. That survival was never guaranteed. That suffering was ubiquitous. That injustice was structural. That progress was neither inevitable nor irreversible. We've learned that humans are remarkably resilient, capable of enduring conditions that seem unbearable, of finding meaning in suffering, of loving amid loss, of creating beauty amid ugliness, that our ancestors survived impossible circumstances so that we might exist, that their struggles were not in vain. We've learned that modernity, whatever its flaws, represents genuine progress in reducing suffering and expanding opportunity, that the privileges we enjoy are recent, fragile, and worthy of preservation and extension, that gratitude for our circumstances should inspire determination to share benefits more widely. We've learned that you would not survive in Tudor England, not because you're weak, but because you're adapted to different conditions, that every age creates humans suited to its specific challenges, that we cannot judge the past by present standards while acknowledging that past suffering was real and should inform present action. Most importantly, we've learned that history matters, not as curiosity or entertainment, but as essential knowledge for understanding ourselves, our world, and our responsibilities. The past shaped the present will shape the future. We are links in a chain stretching from our ancestors to our descendants. What we do matters. The Tudor men, women and children whose lives we've examined are gone, their struggles ended, their suffering concluded. We cannot help them, but we can honour them by remembering their humanity, by learning from their experience, by working to ensure that future generations need not endure what they endured. As we extinguish the candle and leave Tudor England to its darkness, as we return to our well-lit, well-heated, well-fed present, let us carry forward the lessons of this journey. Let gratitude inspire action. Let knowledge inspire wisdom. Let understanding of past suffering inspire determination to reduce present suffering. Let appreciation for progress inspire commitment to continue it. You would not survive in Tudor England. Be grateful you don't have to try. Honour those who did by building a world where no one must. The chronicle ends. The lessons remain. The work continues.